Hey guys, tonight we're kicking off a deep dive into the weirdest, wildest and most jaw-droppingly strange things people witnessed in the medieval world. And I'll just say it now, you probably won't survive this. Like, if you were there, genuinely in one of these stories. There's about a 90% chance you'd end up cursed, excommunicated or accused of being in league with the devil, just for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop a comment telling me your city and what time you're listening, because let's face it, you and I are both probably up way past bedtime. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It starts in the year 776. You're in Saxony, modern-day Germany, and things are tense. Charlemagne is off trying to unite Europe under Christianity, and the Saxons, who aren't really thrilled about all the crosses and forced baptisms, are in full rebellion mode. You're stationed inside a wooden fortress in the town of Sigeberg. Imagine pinewood towers, the muddy moat, the smell of sweat, cooked barley and damp wool. It's evening. The sun is just dipping below the horizon, turning the sky that bruised orange and purple colour you only get in deep autumn. Suddenly everyone starts yelling. You run up to the ramparts thinking maybe the Saxons are attacking again, but no. It's the sky that's attacking. Up there, moving silently across the clouds, are what the monks later describe as two flaming shields. Not stars, not comets, shields. Circular, rimmed with fire, gliding silently above the fortress, and then turning sharply, hovering, almost observing. The Saxons, fierce warriors who'd been about to launch an assault, see them too and flee in panic. Like full-blown drop-your-spear-and-run panic. Monks in the monastery nearby start scribbling furiously, not just about the battle, but about the miracle in the sky. You, standing there, mouth open, heart pounding, are left wondering, what in the actual hell did you just see? Now, we can't get away with calling this a UFO, obviously, but medieval chroniclers were nothing if not literal. They didn't write poetry about burning shields because it sounded cool. They wrote that because that's what they believed they saw. Fast forward several centuries and some researchers chalk it up to an atmospheric phenomenon, maybe a parhelion, also known as a sundog, which can create the illusion of multiple glowing suns or reflections in the sky. But those don't hover and swerve and cause an entire enemy force to run screaming into the woods. You know? Here's where it gets weirder. This isn't an isolated story. Medieval Europe is loaded with accounts of strange things in the sky. Glowing orbs over abbeys, armies battling in the clouds, crosses of fire floating above churches, and every time it's written down with this fascinating blend of awe and sheer terror. Because let's remember, the medieval sky wasn't just a place where the weather came from, it was heaven, literally. Anything unusual up there wasn't just weird, it was divine or demonic. But let's zoom back in. You're there on the tower, surrounded by other terrified guards who are crossing themselves and mumbling prayers. You glance at the horizon, and for a moment, you think you see a third flaming shield in the distance, smaller, maybe moving toward the others. It vanishes before anyone else sees it. Do you mention it? Or do you keep that little detail to yourself because you know full well that seeing too much gets people in trouble around here? And that's a real thing too. In the Middle Ages, being the one who noticed the unnatural was dangerous. The church was the authority on all things cosmic and divine, and if you saw something they couldn't explain, or worse, didn't like, it could go very badly for you. There's even a monk in the 13th century who wrote a confession where he admitted to seeing lights like angels moving across the sky near his monastery, and then immediately prayed for forgiveness, assuming he'd been shown a demonic illusion to test his faith. This leads to one of the great scholarly debates about medieval sky phenomena. Were they real, fabricated, exaggerated, or misunderstood natural events? Some historians argue that the chroniclers were just doing their best with very limited scientific understanding. So a meteor becomes a fiery wheel. A comet becomes a divine omen. Others point out that while medieval people lacked our tech, they weren't idiots. They knew what stars looked like. They knew what lightning looked like. And when something didn't fit the mould, they took it very seriously, and described it in ways that feel eerily familiar to us now. And then, of course, there's the fringe theory crowd. The ones who say this was all early evidence of extraterrestrial contact. That the flaming shields were spacecraft, observed centuries before we had the language to describe them. It's out there, sure, but then again, so were those two shields. You eventually climb down from the tower, still shaken. That night, huddled near the fire in your barracks, you hear a grizzled old knight mutter something like, "I saw one of those in 743 over Aquitaine. Thought it was the end of the world." You look at him, waiting for more, but he just stares into the fire and says nothing else. And as you try to sleep, the wind howls through the cracks in the timber walls. You wonder if, somewhere up there, those shields are still watching, or waiting. You've barely shaken the image of those flaming shields when something even stranger comes your way. You're travelling now. Let's say you're a merchant, which means long days on foot, and even longer nights in creaky inns or sleeping under trees that drop dew on your face around dawn. This time, your route takes you through Suffolk, in England, sometime in the 1100s, when the forests are thick, the roads are sketchy, and the weirdness level is already high thanks to the fog that seems to cling to everything. It's in the village of Woolpit that you stop for the night, and it's there you hear the story. A few decades ago, so the locals say, 2 children had appeared just outside of town near the edge of a deep pit that gave the village its name. They were a boy and a girl, young, maybe 7 or 8, dressed strangely in clothes no one recognised. They spoke no language that any farmer or priest could understand, and their skin was green. Yeah, like literally green. Not pale, not sickly, not slightly olive-toned under bad lighting. Green like fresh peas, like new grass. It was the kind of detail that might sound like a bad joke, but the villagers swore by it. And you're sitting in the corner of this smoky little inn, sipping something that probably used to be beer, listening to the innkeeper tell the story for the 10th time. He gestures wildly with his ladle as he describes the moment the kids were found, trembling, holding each other, scared out of their minds and obviously not from around here. According to him, they were taken in by a local knight. The boy didn't make it. He died within a few months, refusing to eat anything but raw beans. But the girl eventually adapted. She started eating regular food, slowly lost the green tinge in her skin, and even learned enough English to explain more or less where she'd come from. Only it made no sense. She spoke of a land with no sun, only twilight. Everyone there was green, she said. Everything had a dim glow, like the world lived forever at the edge of dusk. Her people, she claimed, lived underground or beneath some kind of barrier, and she and her brother had followed a sound, bells maybe, and ended up walking through a tunnel. When they came out the other side, the sun was blinding, and then they were surrounded by strangers. You're leaning forward now, the ladle swinging closer to your face than you'd like, trying to imagine this place. A twilight world full of green people, underground cities. This isn't just local myth. 2 different medieval chroniclers, Ralph of Coggeshall and William of Newburgh, wrote about it. They argued over a few of the details, sure, like whether the girl's name was Agnes, or what exactly she said about her home, but they both agreed the children were real, the green skin was real, the vanishing of the boy was real. Historians today are all over the place on this one. Some suggest the kids were Flemish refugees, orphaned and confused, speaking a dialect no one recognised, and suffering from chlorosis, a type of iron deficiency anemia that can give the skin a greenish tint. But even those theories have problems. Why didn't they recognise the sun, or understand basic English or Latin? And what about the place they described, St. Martin's Land, always in twilight? Other scholars propose it was an allegory, maybe a religious metaphor, or a way to explain outsider children arriving in the village. But if that's the case, why bother writing about the green skin at all? Why would you invent that detail unless it had some basis in the weirdness of reality? And then, of course, we hit the fringe interpretations, parallel worlds, dimensional bleed-throughs, that these weren't just lost kids, but travellers, accidental or otherwise, from some place humans aren't supposed to be aware of. A theory that's a little sci-fi, sure, but also weirdly consistent with stories from around the world about people vanishing and reappearing in odd places with no memory of how they got there. You sit in your corner, cup empty now, the fire down to low red coals. The innkeeper starts wiping down the bar, muttering about how the green girl eventually married a man from King's Lynn and lived a long, quiet life. No one knew if she ever saw another person from her home again. But here's the kicker. The story doesn't really end. Just a few decades later, there are whispers of other sightings. Children wandering into villages, dazed, foreign, always with strange clothes, always with stories about places that don't exist on any map. They don't all have green skin, no, but the pattern repeats. enough to make you wonder. You step out into the night, air cold, stars sharp overhead. The pit the children were found near is still there, just a hollow now, surrounded by brambles and nettles. But the locals avoid it. They say the earth still hums there sometimes if you kneel and press your ear to the ground. Some think it's just wind echoing through the rocks, others aren't so sure. You pause for a moment, consider kneeling, just to listen. But something, maybe a leftover instinct from that tale, tells you to leave it be. You turn back toward the village, hands in your cloak, and head toward bed. Back in your room, you close the shutters tight, just in case the twilight world decides to bleed through again. You've heard of people losing themselves in music, sure, but have you ever heard of music swallowing an entire town? Let's jump to 1518 in the city of Strasbourg. Summer's in full swing. It's hot, like medieval walls sweating hot. People are cranky, overworked, and probably slightly malnourished. You're walking through the narrow streets, dodging carts full of barley and bad cheese, when you hear something odd. It's not singing, not exactly. It's rhythmic thumping, slapping feet, clapping hands, like someone dancing, but wildly and very much alone. You turn the corner and there she is, a woman, mid-30s maybe, spinning, stomping, arms flailing like she's at some kind of medieval rave. No music, no partner, just her and the cobblestones and a look on her face that is not joy. It's glazed over, trapped, almost desperate. You glance around, expecting laughter, maybe scorn, but no. People are watching her with grim expressions, whispering prayers under their breath. You think, she's sick, maybe drunk, but she keeps going. Hours pass, she doesn't stop. The next day, still dancing. By the end of the week, she's joined by dozens more. Men, women, teenagers, rich, poor, clergy, labourers. None of that matters anymore. One by one, they start dancing, not by choice. That's the freaky part. It's like they can't stop. They collapse, sleep for an hour, maybe two, then rise and keep moving. Some are weeping while they do it. Some laugh hysterically. Others scream, blood pouring from their feet. By the end of the month, nearly 400 people are dancing through the streets of Strasbourg. And yes, some of them die. Heart attacks, strokes, sheer exhaustion. People literally dance to death. You're watching it happen, shaking your head, maybe holding your kid back from joining in because at this point no one knows what's going on. You'd think the city would step in with a little common sense. Medical help, maybe some rest, hydration, something to stop this madness. But instead, the city builds a stage. Yeah, no kidding. They actually encourage the dancers, hire musicians, because the prevailing theory at the time is that this is a hot blood issue, a medical imbalance, and the only way to cure it is to let the energy burn out. So they pipe in drums and flutes to help them dance it off. It doesn't work. More die, the stage collapses, people keep dancing in the rubble. So where the hell did this come from? This is where things split into two camps. Some historians argue it was mass hysteria, triggered by collective trauma, maybe famine, maybe disease, maybe just the bleakness of life in the Holy Roman Empire during a brutally hot summer. In this view, the dancing was psychosomatic. The first woman, they say, sparked something, an echo of anxiety that spread like wildfire through a tightly wound population. A kind of medieval panic attack scaled up to nightmare levels. Others suggest it was ergot poisoning. That's a mould that grows on damp rye and can cause hallucinations, convulsions, even gangrene. Basically, LSD's evil cousin. And in wet summers it thrives. It's possible that contaminated bread kicked off a neurological chain reaction. People twitching, convulsing, interpreting the movement as dancing, and falling into lockstep with a terrifying rhythm no one could hear. Of course, there's always the stranger side. Some people believed the dancers were cursed by St. Vitus, a saint associated with epilepsy and, dancing. Medieval folks thought if you angered St. Vitus, you'd be struck with the dance. Possession was also floated as an explanation. Demons hijacking bodies, turning people into unwilling puppets. A few reports even mention dancers claiming they felt hands guiding them, unseen forces pulling them left and right, fast and faster. You hear one woman scream, "I'm not moving, it's moving me." Eventually the city does a full 180. They round up the remaining dancers and cart them off to a shrine dedicated to, you guessed it, St. Vitus. The dancers are dressed in red shoes sprinkled with holy water and forced to pray for deliverance. Some recover, others vanish. And just like that, it's over. The dancers collapse one last time. The music stops. The square, once filled with frenzied limbs and pounding feet, is eerily quiet. People sweep up broken shoes and bloodied cloth. Life, as medieval life tends to do, stumbles awkwardly back to normal. You're left standing there in the aftermath, wondering if any of it made sense. Could hundreds of people really have lost control of their own bodies at the same time? Could a fungus really do that? Could trauma? Could God? Or was there something else? One chronicler, anonymous of course, wrote a short passage at the end of his account of the dancing plague. It reads, "The sound came from beneath. It hummed before it rose." That's it. One sentence. But it opens a door you really didn't want opened. What if the music was real, but not audible to most ears? What if it wasn't hysteria, or mould, or saints, or sin? What if it was a summons? The next time you hear music late at night, music you didn't turn on, you might find yourself remembering Strasbourg, 1518, and hoping it wasn't your feet that just twitched. You've walked through haunted skies and cursed dances already, so by now you might be thinking you've seen it all. But tonight, let's go south, way south, to Sicily, where the air smells like citrus and sea salt, and the wind carries the sound of church bells, market haggling, and the occasional rumour about something very big roaming the hills. Welcome to Palermo, late 1400s. You're in the crowd today, elbow to elbow with local townsfolk, nobles, and a surprising number of monks who have definitely left their monasteries just to get a glimpse of what everyone's whispering about. A giant! No, not metaphorically. A literal, bone-crushing, head-scraping, tower-peaking giant. Or at least, that's what people are claiming. At first you think it's a scam. Some poor guy with gigantism, maybe 7 feet tall, wearing platform shoes and a tunic 3 sizes too big. But then the cart rolls in, and yeah, this is different. There's a platform carried by a dozen sweating men, and on it, strapped upright like a tree trunk that grew legs, is a man easily 10 feet tall, maybe more. Thick-limbed, impossibly long arms, fingers like polished stone. His skin is pale, his eyes sunken but alert. He blinks slowly, almost like it's a chore. And the most unsettling thing? He's smiling. People gasp. Some cross themselves. A few shout in Sicilian about the Nephilim, the giants from the Bible, the offspring of angels and humans. Others mutter about fallen gods, or worse, experiments by alchemists gone wrong. One older man, his voice shaking, swears he saw a giant like this years ago, buried in the hills north of here, dug up by earthquake and exposed just long enough for some monks to measure the bones, before the earth swallowed it again. You hear words like Anakim and Titans tossed around, and somewhere in the mess, one very enthusiastic priest yells that this proves everything written in Genesis. So where did this towering man come from? According to local rumour, he was discovered in a hidden cave not far from Mount Etna, yep, the volcano, by a group of shepherds. They said he was sleeping, not dead, not fossilised, sleeping. When they tried to touch him, he opened his eyes, sat up, and let out a sound that made their goats faint. He didn't speak at first. He just stood up, shook the dust off, and began walking toward the coast. Now, this is where the stories start to fork like crazy. Some people say the church immediately claimed him as a miracle. Others say he was chained and transported under guard, not because he was dangerous, but because he knew things, and kept whispering in ancient Greek, Hebrew, and something no one could identify. The scholars went nuts over it. Everyone else was just busy freaking out over the logistics of feeding him. And here's a weird, fringy twist. One monk wrote in his journal that the giant had scars on his arms, delicate patterns that resembled maps. Not tattoos, not carvings, scars. As if they had been written onto his body from inside. Modern scholars naturally debate the hell out of this. Was it a wild exaggeration of someone with extreme acromegaly? Could it have been a misinterpreted tall tale that grew over time like the fish that got away stories? Sure, but there's also a curious pattern to consider. Reports of giants don't just exist in Sicily. They show up all over medieval Europe, England, France, the Alps, Northern Africa, and they're usually not described as monstrous, they're described as sad, worn, almost misplaced in time. Some go even further and point to excavations of unusually large human bones found near cathedral sites and old grave sites, bones that were quietly lost or reburied before anyone could get a second look. There's even an account from the 12th century of monks in France digging up a skeleton with a skull the size of a wine barrel. They destroyed it immediately, claiming it was a devil's trick. Very convenient. Back in Palermo, the crowd is losing its mind. Some chant. Others throw flowers. A small boy tosses an apple up to the giant, who catches it with eerie grace. He takes a bite, chews thoughtfully, then mutters something that no one understands, except for a bearded traveller beside you, who turns pale and walks away without another word. Later that night, as you sit in a quiet tavern, people still talk about the giant, but something feels off. You notice that none of the city officials stayed long at the viewing, that the monks who escorted him looked terrified, and that, when the sun went down, the platform was rolled back into a stone building on the edge of the city, locked, sealed, and, according to the barkeep, guarded by someone who didn't look quite human. A week later, you hear the giant was gone, vanished. Some say he walked into the sea, others say he crumbled to dust. A few whisper he was taken to Rome, and one guy, very drunk and very sincere, swears the volcano opened up again, just for a moment, and swallowed him whole. That's the thing about medieval giants. No matter how many are seen or touched or displayed to the public, they all vanish. Their stories end in silence, in disappearance, and somehow that's worse than if they'd stayed and rampaged through the countryside. Because it makes you wonder, what else is out there sleeping beneath our feet? There's something unsettling about rain. Not the gentle kind that makes you want to curl up under a blanket, but the unexpected kind. The kind that hits when the sky's too clear, the air too still. The kind where you look up and wonder, where is this even coming from? Now imagine that, but instead of rain, it's blood. You're in 9th century France, somewhere between the tail end of Charlemagne's glory days and the creeping anxiety of Viking raids. The village is small, dozens of thatch roof homes, a church that leans just slightly, and fields that stretch into a horizon you mostly ignore unless someone screams raiders. But today there's no screaming. Not at first, just stillness. The kind of stillness that makes birds shut up and dogs slink under carts. Then comes the drop. 1, 2. At first, it looks like a bit of dew from the eaves, but when it hits your tunic, it doesn't feel like water. It's sticky. You touch it and stare at your fingers. Dark red. Wet. Warm. You look up and see nothing unusual. No storm clouds, no angels with swords, no fire-wheeled chariots, just the usual sky. And yet, it's raining blood. You're not the only one who sees it. Shouts ring out. Mothers clutch their children. A monk drops to his knees, immediately trying to figure out which book of the Bible this is supposed to fulfill. Others run for buckets because, hey, anything that falls from the sky is probably a message from God or a cure for something. Or both. The blood keeps coming, streaking the fields, dripping from rooftops, soaking the freshly turned earth. It smells metallic and a little wrong, like something old and sour. It pulls in the cracks of the village road and stains the altar cloth inside the church. It lasts for hours. Later, the records will claim it was a miracle, though whether that meant a blessing or a curse, nobody really clarified. The monks wrote it down. People in neighbouring towns said it must be the wrath of God, or maybe a sign that a saint was martyred nearby. A few bold souls said it was a warning. Of what? They didn't know. That's how warnings work in the Middle Ages. Vague, terrifying, and always open to interpretation. Blood rain, believe it or not, isn't unique to France. There are stories all over Europe, Ireland, Spain, parts of Germany, and it's not always blood. Sometimes it's milk, or oil, or meat. But blood is the one that really messes with people's heads. You can laugh off falling frogs, but you can't ignore a sky that weeps. Let's fast forward to a more scientific angle. Modern meteorologists believe some of these events were caused by red dust storms, fine sand blown up from the Sahara, mixed with rain clouds, and deposited as reddish liquid. Okay, fair. But here's where it gets weird. In some documented cases, verified ones, the liquid wasn't just red, it clotted. It behaved exactly like animal blood. When tested centuries later from preserved cloth samples, the stuff showed hemoglobin-like properties. Now you're wondering, whose blood? Because let's be clear, no one reported any dead cattle missing. no slaughterhouse mishaps, no high-up bird blender accident, and it didn't fall in spots where blood should have been anywhere near the water table. One priest wrote that after the blood rain, several of the villagers started having dreams, the kind that made them wake up sweating, muttering about people with eyes where their mouths should be, and iron wheels rolling across the sky. Another account said a local well turned black for 3 days, not muddy, black, and one child, born 9 months later, was said to have a red birthmark across his chest in the exact shape of a falling drop. Coincidence? Probably. But this was the Middle Ages. Everything was a sign. Everything meant something, and nothing was just a coincidence. Back to you. You wake up the morning after and the ground still reeks of iron. Your sheep won't go into the pasture. Birds avoid the town entirely. The priest tries to hold mass, but the pages of his Bible are streaked with dried crimson, and halfway through the homily he just starts weeping. Eventually the rain washes it away. The sky turns back to blue and life stumbles forward like it always does, but no one forgets. The old people talk about it for decades. Some swear they still see spots of red in the corners of their homes, like the blood seeped into the wood itself. A few houses are abandoned completely. And here's the footnote to this particular horror show. A year later, the region is hit by the worst locust swarm in a century. Crops fail, livestock sicken, and then come the Vikings, cutting through the land like a blade. It's brutal. You survive, but just barely. And in the years that follow, you remember that rain. You remember how warm it felt on your skin, how slow it slid down the stone, how it didn't make a sound when it fell. You wonder if it was a prophecy, or a curse, or maybe a warning that you failed to understand in time, and somewhere in the back of your mind, even when things go back to normal, you start to check the sky a little more often, just in case. Because when the clouds gather again, you can't help but wonder, will it be water this time? Snow falls quietly across the Devon countryside, blanketing everything in that perfect muffled stillness. It's February 1855. Yes, technically not medieval anymore, but let's be honest, parts of rural England at this point still feel like the 1400s. Cobblestone paths, thatched roofs, no indoor plumbing, and a general suspicion of anyone who owns more than 3 books. You're staying in a small stone cottage outside the village of Topsham. The fire's burning low, your feet are freezing despite 2 layers of socks, and outside it's the kind of cold that makes trees crack and horses refuse to blink. Morning comes, and with it, confusion. You step outside into the snow, boots crunching softly, breath hanging in the air like ghost steam. And then you see it. Footprints. But not normal footprints. These are strange, hoof-like, deep, sharp at the back, split at the front like a cloven animal's, only too narrow, too perfect, no drag marks, and they go everywhere, over hedges, across rooftops, through narrow gaps in stone walls that no pig or deer could squeeze through. Up one side of your cottage roof, down the other, then straight across the frozen pond. You crouch and stare. The tracks are evenly spaced, precisely 8 inches apart. Like someone or something walked with robotic perfection. No slipping, no staggering, just a single line stretching across the land for miles. It's not just you. By noon, half the village is outside, bundled up in wool cloaks and scarves, pointing and murmuring, tracing the tracks with brooms and sticks. Some follow them for hours. The more adventurous climb rooftops and find the prints continue uninterrupted, as if gravity doesn't apply to whatever made them. People start whispering about the devil, because what else walks on cloven hooves, ignores gravity, and passes through locked gates and high walls without a scratch? You hear the rumours that in some areas the tracks led right up to windows, paused, then turned away. That in one village they went into a churchyard, circled a grave 3 times, then vanished, and in another they entered a barn and stopped, no tracks leading out. By the next day the local priest calls for prayers. Farmers scatter ash across their thresholds. One woman refuses to open her door at all, convinced the devil is still wandering. Her cat agrees. It's hiding under the bed and hasn't stopped hissing since sunrise. So what could have caused this? Modern theories include everything from escaped kangaroos, seriously, to hopping mice, badgers, or a mass hallucination triggered by snow blindness. Some suggest an atmospheric anomaly, maybe hail, falling in such a way that it mimicked hoofprints. But that doesn't explain the consistent spacing, or the vertical climbs, or why the track stopped inside walled gardens that no animal could enter. A few daring voices in the 20th century proposed a kind of early experimental aircraft, something silently gliding over the countryside, maybe even an airship before its time, letting down a probe or leg-like appendage that touched the snow in perfect patterns. But that would require technology nobody had access to, at least not officially. And then there's the folklorist theory, that this wasn't an isolated event but part of an older pattern. Stories of strange tracks appear in medieval European texts too. Hoofprints in impossible places, reported after mysterious lights or strange sounds in the night. Always in winter, always after heavy snow. Some even connect it to the wild hunt, a ghostly procession said to ride across the sky on stormy nights. The leader? Often Odin, sometimes the devil, always something you don't want to meet in the dark. Back in Devon, the tracks remain for days until fresh snowfall erases them. But the memory sticks. Years later, old-timers still talk about that February, about the hoofprints that crossed the river without breaking the ice, that walked across haylofts and through keyholes, about how quiet the world felt while it happened, and how nothing, not a sound, disturbed the night while the tracks were being made. No dogs barked, no birds took flight. It was as if everything alive held its breath. You head back inside your cottage, suddenly aware of how thin the door is. The fire's out, the shadows are long, you check the window, no tracks, yet. But if you wake up to find one perfectly formed hoofprint on your roof, maybe, don't go outside that morning, just saying. You're in a candlelit room, the kind that smells like dried herbs, burnt wax and too many secrets. There are books piled like unstable towers on every surface, each one more brittle than the last. The air is thick with the scent of ink and something faintly metallic, maybe from all the brass instruments hanging from the rafters. You're here because someone whispered about a talking head, and naturally you had to see it for yourself. The man who owns the place is a scholar, or at least that's what he claims. Wild white beard, ink-stained fingertips, eyes that look like they haven't blinked in days. He leads you to the back of the room, past a desk covered in open scrolls and diagrams you can't read. And there, under a cloth, is the thing. He pulls it off slowly, like a magician unveiling the final trick. It's a head, not a real one. Or, not entirely. It's made of metal, with gears at the jaw and a strange assortment of levers at the back. The eyes are gemstone. Rubies, maybe. Or just painted glass. It has no hair, but the shape is unmistakably human. And according to this scholar, it talks. This isn't just a one-off curiosity. Throughout the Middle Ages, there are scattered but persistent rumours of so-called brazen heads, mechanical or magical heads that could answer questions, reveal the future, or whisper secrets from other realms. The most famous name tied to these creations, Roger Bacon, a 13th century English philosopher, theologian, and all-around intellectual wildcard. He was said to have built a brass head that could speak and even predict the future, but only at a specific time. And of course, the story goes that Bacon missed it. The head spoke once, just once, and no one was around to hear it. Now, skeptics say these are just myths, allegories for forbidden knowledge or misunderstood science. But the weird part is that multiple medieval sources, monks, clerics, even rival scholars, mention similar stories. Not just in England, in Italy, in France, even in the Byzantine Empire. Always a head, always made of metal, always just a little too advanced for the time. One writer claimed that a head spoke in 7 languages and was built using celestial alignments and dragon's breath. Another claimed the voice it spoke with was not human, that it vibrated through the bones of the listener rather than the air, which is, not something you want to hear at bedtime. Some believed the heads were animated by demons, others thought they were powered by angelic energy, captured somehow through alchemical rituals or divine geometry. A few of the more paranoid monks believed these devices weren't made by humans at all, but found, partially buried in ruins or unearthed from beneath ancient temples. Remnants of a civilization that came before, maybe. One that understood machinery in a way the medieval world couldn't even begin to. Back in the room, the scholar begins to wind a crank at the base of the head. You hear a soft clicking, like clockwork stretching its legs, then a hum. The mouth opens slightly, revealing rows of brass teeth. You expect it to speak. It doesn't. Not yet. Ask it something, the scholar says. You hesitate because, frankly, your top question at this moment is, how do I get out of here without being cursed? But eventually you ask something simple. Maybe, what time is it? Or what's my name? Something harmless? Nothing happens. Then, in a voice that sounds like stone grinding against stone, the head says, "Too late." The scholar jolts, clearly not expecting that. He laughs nervously, mutters about time errors, and how the head only answers properly when Saturn is in the right house. He fumbles with the levers, trying to reset the mechanism. You don't ask another question. Later, as you walk back through the darkened streets, you remember another story. One from Florence, where a nobleman kept a talking head locked in a room beneath his villa. He was said to visit it once a week and return visibly aged every time. No one knew what it told him. Then there's the case from Prague, unverified, but whispered among old occult circles, about a head that answered everything except one question. Who made you? When someone finally asked, it screamed so loudly that glass shattered across the city. And of course, scholars argue about the whole thing. Some say the brazen head myth is just an exaggeration of early automata, mechanical toys like birds that flapped or lions that roared. Others say it's a metaphor for the dangers of seeking knowledge too fast, too recklessly. But then you come across a fringe text tucked into a dusty corner of the Abbey Library that claims one head still exists, hidden in a vault beneath Rome, sealed in a box covered in sigils, waiting. There's even a name etched into its base according to the text. Not a Latin name, not Hebrew, not Greek, just a single word. Listen. You can't shake that detail. You lie in bed that night thinking about it. If you had a chance to ask a question, just one, and be guaranteed an answer, would you? What if the cost was just a little too high? What if you didn't get to choose which voice answered back? The wind rattles the shutters. You close your eyes, and for a moment, you think you hear a whisper. It starts with thunder, but not the normal kind. Not that low, lazy rumble that rolls across the hills like a sleeping god turning over. No, this is sharp, loud and fast, like a battlefield that forgot where the ground ends and the sky begins. You step out of your small house, a simple timber-framed thing that creaks in every breeze, and look up. The clouds are low and heavy, slate grey bordering on black, and in the distance, beyond the hills, you see flashes of light. But they're not striking the earth. They're hovering, like bursts of torch fire flaring mid-air. You think, storm. Then you hear shouting and you head up the road past moss-covered walls and terrified livestock trying to wedge themselves under anything solid. And that's when you see the rest of the village clustered near the ridge, all of them staring skyward. You follow their gaze and your breath catches. There's a battle happening in the clouds. Not lightning, not birds, not the usual swirling, tortured shapes of a coming storm. You see forms, figures, humanoid and armed, shapes clashing in mid-air, spears maybe, or swords. Every now and then, one figure breaks apart like smoke. Others seem to glow. You think, this is not possible, but here it is. And you're not hallucinating. Dozens of people are seeing it too. This isn't some lonely drunk in a field claiming he saw angels. This is your entire town gaping at the heavens while a ghost army fights an invisible war over your heads. These stories, sky battles, celestial clashes, spectral armies, dot medieval chronicles all over Europe. They call them phantom armies, ghost wars, or heavenly skirmishes. Sometimes they're written off as omens. Other times they're described in detail that's a little too vivid, a little too consistent across cultures to ignore. Take, for example, the 14th century account from England, where people in Yorkshire claim they saw two armies clash in the sky for 3 hours. They reported the armour colour, the formation, even the outcome, one side routing the other, then vanishing. The priest interpreted it as a sign from God. The locals just started sleeping with knives under their pillows. Or in the year 776, yes, same year as those flaming shields over Sigiburg, there's a tale from the monastery of Clofeshow. The monks claimed they saw riders in the sky, galloping across the clouds, glowing with fire and trailing mist. One even swore he heard shouting in Latin. Some historians now argue that what these people witnessed was a natural phenomenon called a superior mirage, reflections of distant images bent upward by unusual temperature layers. In rare conditions, this can make ships appear to float, or armies appear in the clouds. It's science. Neat. Except, these accounts often include things that don't fit, like glowing weapons, or voices, or the same figures appearing again years later in different parts of the country. There's even one report where a man recognised his dead brother in the Sky Army, and then saw him again that night in a dream, in the same armour. In Germany, 1320, a full town reports seeing a knight in shining gold armour leading an army of pale horses through the clouds. They rode in silence, no clash, no war, just a procession. A week later, plague struck. The people said it was Death himself leading a scouting party. "Back in your village," someone yells, because one of the figures in the sky has fallen. You all see it. A shape breaking from the mass and plunging downward, trailing a line of red light, like a comet dipped in blood. It vanishes behind a hill. People scream. A few start running toward the hill. Others run the opposite direction. You go. When you reach the hill, breathless and unsure why you're not already regretting your life choices, there's no fallen figure, no crater, just scorched grass and a smell like burnt metal and flowers. One child says he saw a man with no face kneeling there, holding a sword that buzzed. You think he's making it up until he shows you a rock, split clean down the centre, still warm to the touch. Back in town, the sky battle fades. The clouds disperse slowly, ashamed maybe, or just tired. It's quiet again. Too quiet. That night you hear the village priest warning against telling outsiders. They'll call it heresy, he says, or witchcraft. He advises prayers, lots of them. You, meanwhile, lie in bed staring at the ceiling, listening, wondering if the battle is still going on just somewhere else. What if it wasn't a vision but a window? And what if they, whoever they are, can see you just as clearly? Fringe thinkers much later will tie these sky armies to interdimensional warfare. They'll claim medieval people witnessed military conflicts bleeding through from parallel planes. That angels and demons were just primitive interpretations of soldiers and tech beyond comprehension. Not heavenly or infernal, just elsewhere. Others will insist it's all metaphor, storytelling, a way to cope with war trauma or explain bad weather. But even those scholars pause when faced with the detail in these accounts, the repetition, the patterns, and the question, why do so many of these sky battles happen right before catastrophe? Famine, plague, invasion, sometimes all three. You don't sleep much that night. The wind rattles your shutters like something tapping to be let in. You think you hear hooves, but that's ridiculous. Then again, so is a war in the sky. There's something suspicious about a corpse that doesn't rot. Not just strange, suspicious. Especially in the Middle Ages, where even the holiest of people tended to return to the earth with all the messy, fragrant efficiency you'd expect from pre-refrigeration biology. So when word spreads that a dead body, buried, sealed, and long forgotten, has been exhumed and found in perfect condition, people talk, loudly and nervously. You're in northern England now, in the wild, wind-swept region of Northumbria. The year is 1104, but the story goes back much further, to a monk named Cuthbert, who died in 687. St. Cuthbert, actually, a quiet man, a hermit, a lover of birds, and according to just about everyone around at the time, a miracle-working saint in the making. After his death, he was buried on Lindisfarne, the Holy Island. Nice little coastal spot. Gets a bit Vikingy from time to time. Fast forward 11 years after his burial, and a group of monks decide to check on the old boy. Officially, it's to relocate his remains to a more honoured spot in the church. Unofficially, they're hoping for a sign, something divine, something marketable. Saint relics are big business, and a saint's femur could get you a cathedral if the miracle stacked up right. What they find, though, is more than just a femur. Cuthbert's body is uncorrupted, flesh intact, skin soft, joints flexible. His hair hasn't fallen out, his clothes, remarkably, aren't even that mildewed. And this isn't some embalming trick, this is medieval England. You're lucky if your dinner stays fresh for a full afternoon. But here lies a man, dead over a decade, looking like he just nodded off during evening prayers. The monks lose it. They rush to document everything. They parade the body around. Pilgrims come flooding in, eager to pray at the feet of a man who clearly has heaven on speed dial. Miracles are reported, cures, visions. One woman swears her goat gave birth to twins after she touched Cuthbert's robe. Another says her fever vanished mid-prayer. You hear it all while standing in the courtyard, squinting at the line of hopeful visitors, like this is the world's strangest amusement park. The church naturally gets involved. They officially canonise him, St. Cuthbert, and he becomes one of the most venerated saints in England. His incorrupt body is moved again and again over the centuries, eventually ending up in Durham Cathedral, where it still supposedly rests today. Although, if we're being honest, a few of those movements were suspiciously vague. War, fire, pillage. Sometimes things got misplaced, but the question remains, why didn't he rot? The Church's answer is simple: divine favour. God chose to preserve his servant as a sign of sainthood. It's rare, but not unique. Several other saints, Clare of Assisi, Bernadette of Lourdes, even the tongue of St. Anthony, were all said to have defied decay. But skeptics argue that these are exaggerated or misreported, that environmental conditions, cool air, dry soil, lack of oxygen, could mummify a body naturally. Still, when you hear about the cloth remaining soft, the scent of flowers around the tomb, the warmth of the skin still clinging days after exposure, well, you start to wonder if something else is going on. And here's where it gets a little odd, even by medieval standards. One monk in the 12th century recorded a strange event during a later inspection of Cuthbert's body. He claimed that, as he leaned over to adjust the saint's cloak, Cuthbert's lips parted slightly. Just a crack. Enough to release a faint, sweet-smelling breath. The monk swore he heard a whisper. Just one word. Wait. He told no one for years, fearing madness or heresy charges. But when he finally confessed, several others claimed to have heard similar things, rustling from within the coffin, dreams of a man standing at the foot of their bed in monastic robes, eyes open and watchful. And not all the stories are warm and glowy. One old abbey tale talks about a thief who tried to break into the tomb to steal a fragment of cloth. He made it home, clutching the relic, only to be found the next day, dead, face contorted in terror, hands still curled around the piece of robe that was now stiff and blackened. There's an open debate among scholars about incorruptibility. Some say it's symbolic, meant to reinforce the power of the Church and the sacredness of certain lives. Others point to preservation techniques that may have existed long before we understood them. And then there are the fringe voices who whisper about stasis, about suspended animation, even about relics from a civilization that understood how to halt decay. Maybe not religious at all, but technological. You lie awake that night in the monastery guest quarters, wondering if Cuthbert's really dead. Not in the his soul has moved on sense, but in the actually gone sense. What if he's in a kind of sleep? Not dead, just waiting. What if all the saints are? You look out the window at the massive bulk of Durham Cathedral glowing faintly in the moonlight. Somewhere in there lies a man who should have crumbled to dust 1,000 years ago, and still hasn't. There's a reason the monks never leave the tomb unguarded. There's a reason the doors are locked with iron keys, and there's a reason no one touches him anymore. Because what if the whisper wasn't just a word? What if it was a warning? It always starts with a scream in the night, a high, keening wail that cuts through the quiet like a blade through linen. You bolt upright in your straw mattress, heart pounding, breath fogging in the cold air of your stone cottage. The scream is followed by howling, low, guttural, hungry. And in the distance a sound you can't quite place. Something between a roar and a snarl. You've heard wolves before. This is not a wolf. You grab a torch and slip outside. The village is already stirring. Doors creak open. Faces peer out. One man is shouting about a missing goat. Another says his sister's dog came back torn open, ribs like piano keys. And someone, no one ever quite agrees who, says they saw it. The beast. You're in 18th century France now, far from the glittering palaces of Versailles and deep in the rural region of Gévaudan. The terrain is rough, hills covered in thick brush, forests that eat sound, and mist that clings to everything. It's easy to get lost here. It's even easier to disappear. The first official death was in 1764. A young girl tending cattle was found mauled, her throat torn out, her face unrecognisable. Over the next few years the bodies piled up, dozens of them. Most were women and children, always savaged, throats and heads targeted. But what shocked everyone was the speed and boldness of the attacks. Some happened in broad daylight, in open fields, right outside homes. Soon, whispers gave it a name, La Bête du Gévaudan. It didn't take long before the local authorities were desperate. They sent in soldiers, set traps, laid bait. They even organised national hunts. Hundreds of men, armed with muskets and pikes, combed the hills. They killed wolves by the dozen. but the attacks continued. The descriptions too grew stranger. Witnesses, those rare few who survived, described a creature like a wolf, but far larger, with reddish fur, a long tail, and eyes that glowed. Some said it walked on all fours, others swore it stood upright when challenged. A few claimed it laughed. You're part of a small search party now, trudging through the forest with a local guide, who keeps muttering prayers under his breath. He says the beast cannot be killed with ordinary weapons, that a silver bullet is required, that he once saw it leap over a hedge taller than a man without so much as touching the ground. You think he's exaggerating, until you see the prints. Giant paw marks, each almost as wide as your hand, pressed deep into the mud, and then they vanish right at the edge of a clearing, like the creature just stopped existing. There's a long silence as your party stares at the empty grass beyond. Then one man whispers, "It flies." Now let's pause for a moment, because this isn't just some backwards folktale. These attacks really happened. Over 100 documented killings, with many more injured. The French king himself, Louis XV, sent his best hunters to take care of it. They failed. Multiple times. Wolves were killed, stuffed, presented to the court, declared to be the beast, yet the killings continued. One famous theory is that it wasn't a wolf at all, but a hybrid. Possibly a hyena or lion brought back from Africa and released, either accidentally or for sport. Others thought it might have been a trained animal, used by a serial killer to commit the murders. More sceptical minds believe it was simply a case of hysteria combined with real, aggressive wolves and a lot of bad record-keeping. But if that were true, why do some of the reports describe armour? Yes, armour. There are several accounts that claim the beast wore some kind of plating on its sides, that arrows and bullets bounced off it. One tale even describes a woman stabbing the beast with a knife, only for the blade to slide off like she'd struck stone. There's also the eerie consistency of the attacks, always the neck, the head, never the stomach or limbs, almost like it knew exactly how to kill quickly. Even stranger, some locals claimed the beast avoided certain homes, ones marked with crosses or protective charms. One hunter said he saw it pause at the edge of a shrine, growling before turning back. There's a legendary moment in 1767 when a local man named Jean Chastel finally killed the creature, supposedly using a silver bullet blessed by a priest. He shot it in the chest, and it let out a noise no animal should make. The body was taken to be studied but decomposed suspiciously fast. Very little remains of it today. And yet, the attack stopped. Officially, the story ends there. Chastel is the hero. The beast is dead. Peace returns. Unofficially, well, you've heard things. That the real beast was never found. That the one killed was just a scapegoat. That the darkness still lingers in those woods. And here's the creepiest fringe theory floating around. That the beast of Gévaudan was not a creature at all, but something sent. Something old. A punishment, maybe. A test. Or a visitor from somewhere else entirely. There's a document buried in a dusty collection in an abbey in Lyon that describes a beast of flame and shadow arriving in the mountains in the year of black sky. The year matches 1764. You walk through the woods now, alone, the others having returned to town. The air is too quiet, the trees too still, and you can't help but feel like you're being watched. You think back to the stories, the claw marks on stone walls, the eyes in the dark, the body that decomposed too quickly to study. Then something howls, and it's not a wolf. You're not sure what you expected when they said anchorite. Maybe a serene old man with a beard that brushes the floor, humming prayers while sipping rainwater and subsisting entirely on faith and moss. But what you find instead is something else. You've travelled to the outskirts of a small village in Wales somewhere around the early 1200s. The road is a rough mess of mud and sheep tracks, and the trees here are the thick, looming kind that drip even when it hasn't rained. Locals call the forest God's elbow, for reasons no one can explain. They also tell you, quietly, like they're afraid the trees might hear, that a man lives out here. A holy man, but also a wild one. A man who's been touched by God, or something close enough to be uncomfortable. They call him the hairy anchorite. You follow a barely there trail to a cave half swallowed by ivy, and there he is. He's hunched over, knees to chest, picking something from his tangled beard. He's wearing a single rough robe, what used to be a robe anyway, and no shoes. His skin is like weathered bark, and his eyes, when they flick up to meet yours, are clear and bright and deeply unsettling. You don't know if he's going to bless you or bite you. Possibly both. You've heard the rumours, that he came from a monastery in York but left after a vision, that he saw an angel whose face was a wheel of eyes, and after that, nothing in the world made sense, so he walked into the woods and never came out. Until now. Because now people seek him. Pilgrims, sinners, the sick, even knights. They come here not for sermons, but for something else. A word, a look, a gesture, and some leave better. Others leave screaming. A few don't leave at all. He doesn't speak in full sentences. He says things like, the skin is only rented and sheep dream in colour, and don't drink from the blue stream on Tuesdays. And yet, people say he's right. Always right. One man claims the anchorite told him not to board a ship. Just that. Not today. The ship sank a week later. Everyone drowned. Another woman swears he placed his hand on her forehead and said, "You're carrying twins." She wasn't even pregnant. She was later. One merchant brought his son, who hadn't spoken in 2 years. The anchorite touched the boy's tongue and whispered something in a language no one recognised. The boy started reciting psalms immediately, and then refused to stop for a full day. You stay the night nearby, sleeping in a ruined chapel half swallowed by moss, and you hear chanting, low and rhythmic, the kind that vibrates in your bones rather than your ears. You look out toward the cave and see a faint glow, like the inside of the earth is smouldering. There's a theory, among scholars who like to dig where they shouldn't, that anchorites like him were early mystics, not just religious hermits, but practitioners of something deeper. Pre-Christian, maybe. That the caves they chose weren't just convenient shelters, but places aligned with something. Earth energies, ley lines, cosmic geometry. They cite old records of anchorites who seem to know things, dates of deaths, harvest outcomes, even invasions, long before they happened. Some were feared, others revered, and some were quietly sealed into their own cells. Their food passed through a slot in the wall until they simply stopped eating. But your hairy friend is different. He doesn't want food, doesn't take money, doesn't even ask your name. He just watches you, eyes wide as if measuring your soul. He mutters something about the wrong sky and you don't belong in this layer, and then picks up a crow skull and hands it to you without explanation. You take it. He smiles. Back in the village, people swarm you. What did he say? What did he give you? Was it a blessing or a curse? You say you don't know, and you mean it. But later you dream. You dream of roots stretching under mountains, of stars blinking out, of a sky that peels open like wet cloth, and in the middle of it all, the hairy anchorite floating, eyes still clear, still unsettling, whispering the same word again and again. You wake up with the taste of moss in your mouth and the crow skull still in your bag. Eventually the anchorite vanishes. Some say he died, others say he turned into a tree. One story claims a shepherd found the cave empty, the walls covered in symbols that pulsed like breathing. The air smelled of honey and blood, and once, years later, a monk in York scribbled in the margins of a psalter. He returned, not as a man. No one can explain what that meant, but if you ask the older villagers, they'll point to the forest and say, "He's still in there, just quieter now." And they'll warn you, don't go in at night, not without the crow skull, and never ask what language he spoke, because if you understand it, it understands you. You're in France again, deep in the countryside where fog rolls like a living thing and every hill hides a chapel, a shrine, or a secret. The air smells of wet stone and wood smoke, and the trees loom like silent sentinels. You're walking through a graveyard, not because you like the ambience, but because you've been told there's a story here. A story about a saint who died, and didn't let that little inconvenience stop him from going on a walk. It's the 7th century, and you're in the land of decapitated saints. Yes, decapitated. Head clean off. That's the weird bit. But weirder still, the fact that some of them, according to very real, very serious medieval texts, just got up and kept going, holding their own heads, preaching, walking, sometimes for miles. It wasn't even considered odd. It was a specific kind of holy phenomenon. They even gave it a name, cephalophory, which roughly translates to head carrier. Because of course it has a name. This wasn't just folklore. It was accepted religious iconography. And the king of all head-carrying saints, St. Denis. Picture this. You're at Montmartre, on the hill that now sits beneath the haze of Paris. Back then it's quieter, just a place where early Christians got themselves arrested, tortured and executed for trying to preach in the wrong empire at the wrong time. Dennis is one of them. A bishop, maybe. A missionary, definitely. He's captured and, in the classic Roman style, publicly executed to make a point. The executioner does his job, off goes the head. Dennis's body slumps, and then, according to the story, it stands up. Not only does he pick up his head, but he also washes it off in a nearby stream, tucks it under one arm and starts walking. Just casually walking. Uphill. People follow. Some fall to their knees. Some scream. Some probably wonder if they're hallucinating from bad wine. But Dennis, still bleeding, and somehow still breathing, walks 6 kilometers before finally collapsing. The spot where he falls becomes sacred. A shrine is built. Later a basilica. Then a full-blown cathedral. Today it's Saint-Denis, the royal necropolis of France, where kings are buried and the bones of power lie under heavy stone. You stare up at that place now, wondering how anyone could believe such a thing. But then you think, is this really any stranger than anything else we've seen tonight? Because Dennis wasn't alone. There's Saint Noyal in Brittany. Beheaded by a furious king, she carried her head across the land to the place she chose to be buried. Saint Osyth, an English noblewoman turned nun, picked up her head and walked to a church door before collapsing. Saint Nicasius of Rheims did the same, and even forgave his killers with his head in his hands. Some accounts go a step further, claiming the severed head spoke, not just gibberish, full sermons, prayers. In one case, a warning. There's even a minor saint said to have carried 2 heads, his and another man's, just to make a theological point. You're trying to wrap your head around this, pun unavoidable, and then the local priest shows you the painting in the chapel. It's medieval, cracked and darkened by centuries of candle smoke, but you see it clearly. A man with a halo, serene face in one hand, blood trailing down his robes, walking calmly past wide-eyed villagers. And the thing is, he looks happy. In medieval theology, this wasn't just body horror for fun. It was symbolic. Proof that divine power outshines physical limitations. That death had no hold on the truly righteous. And yes, there were skeptics even then. Some monks wrote marginal notes expressing doubt. Others tried to reinterpret the stories as metaphor. The walk, a vision, the severed head, a symbol of martyrdom. But the artwork says otherwise. You don't spend a week painting a severed head if you don't believe it happened. Modern historians chalk it up to hagiographic exaggeration. Saints' lives were often written down centuries after the fact, with details inflated for impact. Cephalophores, they say, were just a particularly dramatic narrative device. But even that doesn't explain the consistency. The same miracle, told in different regions by different authors, who had no connection and no internet to copy from. Then there's the fringe theory, that these weren't miracles at all but records of something else. Something people saw and tried to make sense of using the only framework they had, religion. Maybe it was a hallucination, maybe an illusion, or maybe these people really did get back up. Maybe they weren't entirely human to begin with. After all, saints were often described as glowing, levitating, untouched by fire, pain or disease. The line between holy and alien gets fuzzy in some of those old texts, doesn't it? You leave the chapel at dusk. The sky is a bruised purple. The town's quiet now, just the clink of a blacksmith finishing for the night and the distant chant of a monk praying vespers. You walk past the cemetery and your eye catches one of the statues, St. Denis again. Face calm, head in hand. For a second you think the statue blinks. You stop, look again. Nope. Just a trick of the shadows. Probably. But when you get to your inn, the fire already low, you check the door twice. Because the idea of something headless wandering through the dark with divine purpose and no need to knock, yeah, that sticks with you. And later, when the wind outside sounds a bit too much like footsteps on cobblestones, you remind yourself, saints don't haunt. They guide, right? It's midday and the sun is hot. Too hot. The kind of heat that makes your shirt stick to your back and your brain feel like a boiled egg inside your skull. You're in 14th century Italy, trudging along a cracked road lined with olive trees and low stone walls when the air shifts. The smell changes. Gone is the dry, dusty scent of summer. Now it smells wrong. Like old meat, damp leather, something spoiled. And then it starts to rain. At first you're just grateful for the coolness. until you feel a soft plop on your shoulder. You glance down, expecting water, maybe a big raindrop. But no, it's a fish. A whole slippery, still wiggling fish. You look up. More are falling. Frogs too. Long-legged, wet-skinned amphibians thudding onto the road, slapping into the grass, bouncing off your boots. And then, meat. Raw chunks of it. Uncooked, unidentifiable. Some the size of apples, others small and stringy. All of it falling from a sky that still looks blue. You run for cover under a low archway and watch in disbelief as the village road disappears beneath a pile of wet creatures and whatever the red stuff is. It smells like a battlefield after a banquet. You're not alone. Farmers, priests, children. Everyone is staring up in horrified fascination. A monk runs past, clutching a basket to his chest, yelling something about the punishment of gluttons. A few of the kids start collecting frogs like it's a game, but their parents quickly yank them away. Because this is not normal, this is apocalyptic. The reign of animals, or pluvia animalium, as the more Latin-inclined scholars later call it, is a phenomenon scattered through medieval history, baffling and horrifying every time. Frogs in France, fish in Spain, eels in England. Once, reportedly, a full reign of snakes in what is now Hungary, and the meat, that one still leaves scholars blinking. There's a documented event in 1345 in northern Italy, when flesh like that of man fell from the sky for nearly 15 minutes. The monks recorded it, the villagers buried it, and no one talked about it ever again. You ask around after the storm ends. One old woman tells you it means a saint is angry. Another claims it's the sky vomiting the sins of the earth. A local healer starts gathering the fish and frogs to make poultices, swearing they now contain divine properties. And the town priest? He's inside the church, praying louder than usual. You wander the fields and it's a mess. The ground is slick with slime. Crows circle overhead, cautious but interested. There's even a goat licking one of the red chunks, clearly unimpressed. Now, modern science, of course, tries to make sense of this. Tornadoes, waterspouts, wind shears. The idea is that violent storms can suck up water, and the creatures within it carry them high and then drop them miles away. It makes sense in theory, but in practice, these events often come with no sign of storms, no wind, no rain, just sudden biological chaos from a clear sky. And what about the meat? One of the weirdest cases happened long after the Middle Ages, in Kentucky, in 1876, when chunks of red flesh fell from a cloudless sky. Witnesses claimed the pieces were soft, some fatty, some muscular. Tests later said it was likely horse or deer meat, but no horses or deer had gone missing. One man insisted it tasted like lamb, because of course someone ate it. Back in the Middle Ages, though, nobody had the luxury of testing samples or filing meteorological reports. They only had fear, faith, and folklore. You hear about a nearby town where decades earlier a similar event occurred. The townspeople interpreted it as a divine message, meat from heaven. They cooked it, blessed it, and served it at the local abbey. The next week, everyone fell violently ill. The story goes that one of the monks had a vision that night of a black-robed figure standing in the fields, shaking its head slowly. And here's a creepy footnote from a 15th century manuscript. It claims that when these rains happen, they always follow a pattern. 3 animal rains, then one of meat or blood. And each time, the 4th storm is followed by a famine, a war, or a plague. You remember the year now. 1348 is just around the corner. The Black Death. Was this a warning? You look at your hands, streaked with blood and slime, and feel a sudden wave of unease. Maybe this wasn't divine. Maybe it wasn't a storm. Maybe it was a leak. What if the sky doesn't just hold weather? What if it holds something else? Another place, maybe. Another world. And every now and then the seam between us and them wears thin. Just enough for a few things to slip through. Frogs, fish, flesh. You head back into town as the cleanup begins. People are sweeping, burying, praying. A few have lit candles in their windows. One man sits silently in the road, a single frog in his lap, staring at the sky like he's waiting for something worse. And later, as the sun sets and the air cools, you hear a low rumble in the distance. Not thunder, something heavier, something falling. You don't go outside. By now you've seen rain that bleeds, heads that walk, and giants that don't belong on this side of myth. But tonight, You're standing in front of a piece of linen. That's it. A big sheet of cloth, old and yellowed, with the faint outline of a man scorched into its fibres. And yet somehow, it's more disturbing than any beast or storm or sky war you've come across. You're in Lirey, France, mid-14th century. The plague has just started to lose its grip, but the stink of death still lingers everywhere, beneath the floorboards, in the dried-out riverbeds, in the way people flinch at coughs. The church is scrambling to keep the faithful faithful. The relic trade is booming. Everyone's trying to get their hands on a piece of the true cross or a finger bone of some long-dead apostle. But this is something else entirely. The priest leading you through the tiny chapel won't stop talking. He's been building to this moment for the last 20 minutes, and finally he pulls back the curtain like some low-budget theatre magician. There it is, the shroud. At first glance, it looks like a simple burial cloth stretched out across a long table. You've seen plenty. But then your eyes adjust to the dim light of the chapel, and you see it. Faint, but clear, as if seared into the fabric by fire itself. The face, the torso, the hands crossed delicately over the pelvis, the marks that look an awful lot like bloodstains. Not painted, not stitched, just there. The priest says it's the burial cloth of Jesus Christ. You stare a little longer. The image is strangely photographic, more like a ghostly X-ray than anything hand-drawn. The knees are scuffed. The wrist bones show wounds. The back, when they flip it over, reveals what could be lash marks. The face is solemn, peaceful even, and yet it has the weight of someone who's seen everything and wants to be left alone. The priest is beaming now, clearly expecting awe. Maybe a few tears, but all you can manage is a quiet, uneasy silence. Because if this thing is real, it changes everything. And if it's fake, well, it's the most skillful, unnerving forgery in human history. So what's the deal? The Shroud of Turin, though it's not in Turin yet, first appears in public in the 1350s, displayed by a French knight named Gévaudan, whose family claims it's a holy relic passed down through secret channels since the First Crusade. Immediately people start flocking to see it. Pilgrims fall to their knees, skeptics roll their eyes. The local bishop isn't convinced. It smells too much like theatre, too convenient for the church's dwindling power. But the image, it's hard to explain. You touch the edge of the cloth, half expecting to feel heat. Nothing, just rough linen, but your fingertips tingle anyway. Centuries later, carbon dating will throw everyone into chaos, placing the cloth in the 13th or 14th century. A medieval hoax, they say. But others will counter with flaws in the test. Contaminated samples, heat damage, microscopic pollen from Jerusalem embedded in the fibres. The debate goes on and on, even as modern science throws every tool it has at the thing. No pigment, no brush strokes, no obvious technique that could explain the image. It's there, but no one knows how. Back in your time, people are less concerned with science and more with meaning. One local woman claims the shroud healed her son's blindness. Another says she dreamed of the man on the cloth, who told her secrets about her ancestors no one else could have known. A soldier sees the image and throws down his sword, swearing to join a monastery. You watch all this, trying to understand what you're looking at. And then, one evening, you return to the chapel alone. The priest isn't there, the torches are low, and something about the silence feels thick. You sit near the cloth. Just sit. Let the strangeness of it settle around you. After a while, you close your eyes. You're not sleeping, not praying exactly, but your breath slows. Your heart eases. Then something shifts. You feel it before you hear it. A quiet breath, not yours. A weight in the air. The smell of dust and frankincense and something older. You open your eyes, and the image seems sharper, clearer. The eyes on the cloth are closed, yes, but for a split second you're not entirely sure that's true, and you think, what if this isn't just a record? What if it's a window? There's a theory, one that most priests would swat from your hands like a lit match, that the shroud wasn't made by light or pigment but by energy. A burst, something beyond science. Some say resurrection. Others say it was a moment of divine trauma, the spiritual equivalent of a cosmic scream, burned into the cloth like lightning on sand. Then there's the stranger theory, that the image is the result of contact, that something touched this cloth, not from heaven or earth, but elsewhere, and left behind an imprint of something we weren't supposed to see, you leave the chapel that night feeling like you're being watched, but not in a sinister way. More like being studied, measured. The next morning the shroud is gone, vanished. The priest says nothing, just shakes his head and closes the chapel. Rumours spread that it's been stolen. Others say it was taken back. Centuries later it reappears in Turin. But by then, no one knows how it got there, or where it was in between. You still remember the eyes, or the idea of eyes, watching, waiting, not open, but not closed either. You wake to whispers and the smell of burned herbs, sulphur, crushed rosemary, and something darker that curls in your nose like rot dressed in perfume. It's sometime in the 17th century, in France again, but you can't place the year exactly because this particular story doesn't like time. It slips, hides, and moves like smoke. All you know is you're in the home of a noblewoman with too many rings on her fingers and not enough light in her eyes. Her name is Catherine, and she's one of the most feared and most sought-after women in Paris, because they say she knows how to speak to the devil. Tonight you're a guest, a very nervous one. You've been invited to witness something called a Black Mass. You pretend not to believe in it, laugh it off even. But when you stepped inside the house and saw that the windows were shuttered tight, despite the sweltering heat, and that the servants wouldn't meet your eyes, your skepticism started to shrink. Catherine greets you in a voice that sounds like silk draped over a knife. She's elegant, older than she looks. Her gown is dark, embroidered with tiny silver symbols that flicker when she moves, as if stitched from starlight. She takes your hand, smiles, and leads you down a narrow hall you swear wasn't there when you entered. The room you enter is low-ceilinged and candle-lit. The walls are draped in black. There's no cross, no holy water. But in the centre of the room lies a makeshift altar, a slab of cold stone resting on a living woman, naked, silent, eyes shut tight. She doesn't move, doesn't flinch, not even when Catherine places a chalice on her stomach. Around you, a few others begin to chant. Quiet at first, words you don't recognise. Latin, maybe, or something older. One man is weeping, another laughs too loudly. The air grows heavy, the shadows thicken. Catherine raises her hands and begins to speak, not to you, but to something else. And that's when you feel it. Not a breeze, not a noise, just presence. Like a crowd of unseen things have stepped into the room and are now watching, breathing too close to your ear, smiling with teeth that shouldn't fit inside mouths. The ritual begins. There is blood, collected from a chalice passed earlier, claimed to be that of a lamb, but it smells metallic and hot. There is incense, sharp and choking. There is a prayer spoken in reverse and then a name, whispered like a secret someone wants desperately to forget. And then Catherine says, clearly and without hesitation, "He is here." You don't know who he is and you don't want to, but your skin prickles and something inside you, something ancient and small, tries to curl away. The candles flicker, not with wind but with pressure. Something moves inside the flame, and then the girl on the altar opens her eyes and speaks in a voice that doesn't match her face. What she says is nonsense, or prophecy, or a mixture of both. Something about a king who will rot from the inside, a baby born with silver bones, a tower that will fall and sing as it collapses. No one writes it down, no one dares. The ritual ends without fanfare. No explosions, no lightning, just a quiet exhale, like a storm that decided to pass by rather than break open. The others leave slowly, dazed, some trembling, some strangely euphoric. You stay behind, staring at Catherine as she calmly wipes her hands and lights a pipe, as if she didn't just invite something impossible into her parlour. You ask her, because you have to, if she believes it was real. She gives you a long look. Belief is a luxury, she says. Power doesn't wait for belief. It just is. There's a long history of these so-called black masses in Europe. The Church, of course, denounced them as heresy, satanic mockeries of the real mass, performed by witches, heretics, or those desperate for power or revenge. Some were clearly fabrications, invented to destroy enemies or justify inquisitions, but others have documentation that's harder to dismiss. In the 1600s, there was the affair of the poisons in Paris, a scandal that pulled in nobles, priests and royal mistresses, all accused of performing dark rites to win favour, poison rivals, or summon infernal forces. Catherine Monvoisin, La Voisin was the central figure, said to host black masses where infants were sacrificed and demons invoked. She was eventually executed, but her records vanished under mysterious circumstances. And there's always the debate. Were these rituals actual magic? Psychological manipulation? Elaborate theatre designed to terrify, seduce or unhinge? Or were they a secret language, one spoken not to people, but to the spaces between things? One fringe theory suggests these rites weren't satanic at all, but remnants of a much older practice, older than Christianity, older than Rome. A forgotten way of communicating with entities we now call demons only because we lack a better term, beings that exist outside of time, or beneath it. Back in Catherine's salon, she gives you a parting gift, a coin with no face, smooth on both sides. For passage, she says, or payment, depends on how the night goes. You walk home in silence. That night you wake at exactly 3:03 a.m. Your room is freezing, and in the corner where the moonlight doesn't quite reach, something clicks its teeth once, softly. When you light the candle, there's nothing there, only the coin. You're digging in the garden behind your small cottage in Yorkshire, somewhere in the late 1500s, hoping the rocky patch of soil might finally agree to grow carrots, instead of the sad, stringy ghosts it's been producing for the last 3 seasons. The sun's out. The wind smells like ash and damp wool. And then, your shovel strikes something. It's not stone. It's not bone. It's glass. You crouch down, brush away the dirt, and uncover a bottle. Small, dark, stoppered with wax and tightly wrapped in thread. Your first thought is that it's a love charm or someone's long-forgotten drink stash. But as you turn it in your hand, you feel it. Something inside shifts. Not liquid. Not solid. Organic. You pop the stopper, instant regret. The smell hits you like a fistful of rot and iron. Inside the bottle is hair, nails, pins, maybe some blood, or something that used to be blood. You gag, nearly drop it, and suddenly remember the stories. The ones your grandmother used to whisper when the fire was low and the wind had that peculiar whine. You've just found a witch bottle. Welcome to the wonderfully paranoid world of medieval and early modern apotropic magic, where people buried jars filled with bodily waste and sharp objects under their doorsteps to trap curses, confuse demons, or repel witches. Because when you live in a world where illness, crop failure, and sudden death have no clear explanation, you start getting creative and desperate. These bottles were protection, wards, booby traps for the supernatural. The idea was that any malice sent your way, via spell, curse, or evil glance, would be lured into the bottle and stabbed, twisted, drowned, or tangled by whatever mess you'd shoved inside. Hair and fingernails acted as bait, yours, ideally, while needles, thorns, and broken glass did the damage. Sometimes they'd include urine, which was believed to carry the essence of the victim, which means yes, people were peeing into jars for the sake of spiritual self-defense. That's how real the fear was. You didn't want to end up with a wasting sickness, or hear your name called in the wind at night, or see your milk curdle 3 mornings in a row and not do something about it. You bury that bottle again, deeper this time. You're not stupid. And later, at the local alehouse, you bring it up in a casual, roundabout way. Immediately, 3 people start crossing themselves. One man tells you to dig it up again, boil it in holy water, then bury it under a yew tree. Another insists you mustn't move it at all. Once disturbed, he says with wild eyes, it knows your name. You don't sleep well that night. The next day, your neighbour's dog won't come near your house. A pigeon flies into your window, dead on impact. And when you check the shovel, you notice a thin trail of red ants crawling out of the cracks in the handle. None of this means anything, right? Ants are just ants. Pigeons are dumb. Dogs are twitchy. Except your grandmother once said animals know before people do. And then come the dreams. You're standing in your garden. It's night, but the sky is too bright. There's something under the soil, moving. You hear whispering. Not in a language you know, but you understand it anyway. Something about unbinding and returning. You wake with dirt under your nails. The next morning, the bottle's on your doorstep, not broken, not cracked, just waiting. There's a long history of these kinds of protective magic rituals across Europe. Witch bottles were found in chimneys, beneath hearthstones, in the walls of houses, and even buried in churchyards. One was discovered inside a pub wall, wrapped in a sheet of parchment covered in glyphs no one's ever translated. Another was found beneath a castle in Germany, still warm to the touch when unearthed. Some included toad bones, others teeth. One even had a small note inside, just a single word. Remember. Scholars argue about their origins. Some say it's folk magic that predates Christianity, a leftover from the old pagan practices that never really left. Others claim it was half medicine, half superstition, a placebo in a jar for a world with no antibiotics and too many demons. The church mostly looked the other way, unless someone got too creative. But here's the wild part. These bottles still turn up. Modern archaeologists have found dozens of them across England, usually sealed tight and hidden where no one was supposed to find them, and every time one's opened, something strange happens. Cameras short out, lights flicker. A researcher dreams of a woman's face for weeks afterward. Never the same face, never one they recognise. And if you ask the really fringe theorists, they'll tell you the bottles weren't just traps, they were links, not just to whoever made them, but to something else, something on the other side, something that listens when you whisper into the dirt. That night you take the bottle into the woods. You don't know what you're planning to do with it, burn it, smash it, bury it under a boulder, but your legs move anyway, as if they know the path, as if the bottle is guiding you. You reach a clearing, one you don't remember being there before. It smells like lavender and wet stone. And there's a hole, just wide enough you drop the bottle in. The ground hums, a low pulsing beat that you feel in your teeth, then nothing. Silence. You walk home, and in the morning your carrots are sprouting, big, healthy, almost too vibrant, but you don't touch them. Not yet. You're not supposed to be here. That's the first thing you feel as you step into the Lateran Basilica in Rome, early one spring morning in the year 897. There's something wrong in the air. Not just musty church air, but a deeper kind of rot, like incense trying and failing to cover up something foul. You've been told a trial is being held today, a special one, a rare one, but no one tells you what makes it rare until you see it with your own eyes. There's a corpse in the defendant's chair. You stop cold. Everyone else is seated already. Bishops in stiff robes, clerics murmuring prayers, and a few nobles with the smug expressions of people who know what's about to happen. But your gaze is locked on the centre of the hall, where a dead man sits propped up on a throne, dressed in full papal vestments. His face is sunken, skin like waxed parchment, and his fingers curl into claws under his golden gloves. This is Pope Formosus. He's been dead for 7 months, and today he's on trial. It's called the Cadaver Synod, though no one will call it that until much later, once the shame has cooled and the history books have had a chance to process the absurdity. But right now, in this echoing basilica under the flickering torchlight, it's all deadly serious. Pope Stephen VI, the current holder of the throne of St. Peter, presides over the court. He's not hiding his fury. His voice shakes with righteous rage as he lists the charges. Perjury, violating church canon, illegally ascending to the papacy. He rants, spits, gestures wildly. But the accused just sits there, slumped, silent, as dead men tend to do. The body had been exhumed from its tomb for this event, dressed, seated and, most disturbingly, propped up by a young deacon standing just behind the throne. He moves the corpse's head slightly when questions are asked, nods it when answers are expected. It's grotesque, it's surreal, and it's real. You feel your stomach turn. This isn't just theatre, this is rage weaponized. Political revenge turned into ritual. Stephen hated Formosus, or rather, he hated the alliances Formosus had made, the kings he supported, the bishops he promoted, the enemies he didn't keep close enough. And now, with his rival safely in the ground, Stephen is dragging him back into the spotlight for one final humiliation. The trial lasts hours. Formosus is represented by the deacon who holds him upright, occasionally offering ghostly rebuttals on behalf of the corpse. But the outcome is never in doubt. He's found guilty, a dead pope, condemned for crimes he can't answer. Then comes the sentence. The sacred vestments are ripped from the body. The 3 fingers Formosus once used to bless the faithful are cut off. His corpse is stripped, dragged through the basilica, and dumped into a shallow grave. But even that isn't enough. A few days later, the body is exhumed again and thrown into the Tiber River like garbage. This is real, documented, eyewitnessed, and yet it feels like something out of a fever dream. And the aftermath? Oh, it's a mess. The people of Rome are horrified. Word spreads. Riots erupt. Stephen's enemies, quiet until now, smell blood. Within months, Stephen is arrested, imprisoned, strangled in his cell. His papacy ends in the same grotesque way it ruled, tangled in rot. Meanwhile, a new pope takes power and declares the cadaver synod invalid. Formosus is fished out of the Tiber, given a fresh burial, and restored to papal dignity. But that doesn't settle anything. Within a few years, another pope annuls that decision and recondemns Formosus. Then another flips the ruling again. His legacy is like a cursed relic no one wants to touch, but no one dares ignore. And you? You're left standing in the back of that basilica, watching this absurd pantomime of justice unfold, and wondering what happens when the dead refuse to stay silent. Because here's where it gets strange. Even for the medieval church, there are later accounts, unofficial ones, that suggest the trial did have consequences beyond the political. One monk writes that Stephen VI began suffering from visions, distorted faces, rotting hands reaching out of altar walls, Formosus appearing at the foot of his bed each night, eyes wide, lips unmoving. Another account, anonymous, says Stephen's final scream, moments before he was found dead in his cell, was just one word: forgive. Some fringe historians believe the cadaver synod broke something. Not just church law or human decency, but cosmic order. That by putting the dead on trial, the church unwittingly opened a door, one they couldn't close again. There's a legend in Rome, still whispered by older priests, about a locked chamber beneath the Lateran Basilica. A room sealed after Stephen's death. No one goes in, no one talks about it. But they say that some nights, when the wind is wrong, you can hear a rustling from under the floorboards. Like papal robes dragging across stone. You leave Rome a few days later, shaken, not just by the absurdity of what you witnessed, but by the realization that justice, real or imagined, doesn't end with death in this world. Not always. And that sometimes when the dead are humiliated, they find a way to return the favour. You're standing outside the Bastille not as a prisoner but as a curious onlooker. It's 1703, and the French sky is doing its usual gloomy routine. Grey clouds threatening rain, a wind that smells of stone and cold iron. You've come to see something that's not officially listed in the public records. Or anywhere, really. Not because it isn't important, but because it's too important. Or perhaps too dangerous. You're here for the man no one's allowed to name. They call him the man in the iron mask. And yes, he's real. They say he's been imprisoned here for decades. Always in isolation, always masked. Not a cloth mask, not a veil, but a full-on metal faceplate. Iron, or perhaps something darker, smoother. Some claim it was velvet lined to avoid disfigurement. Others say the mask was his face grafted on. The guards aren't talking. Most haven't even seen what's underneath. What you do hear are whispers. That he was arrested under direct orders from King Louis XIV. That no one ever saw his face. Not his jailers, not his doctors, not even the priests who came to hear his confession. That he was moved constantly, from prison to prison, Pignerol, Sainte Marguerite, the Bastille, all with the same eerie rule. No speaking his name, no sharing his face, no writing of his past. So, who was he? You lean in close to a man selling roasted chestnuts near the prison gates, and he shrugs. A nobleman, he says, maybe the king's twin, too dangerous to exist. Another man insists he's a military general who discovered secrets he shouldn't have. One woman crosses herself and mutters, "It was never a man at all." The theories spiral fast. One says he was the real father of Louis XIV, hidden away because the truth would have shattered the monarchy. Another claims he was the king's own twin brother, born just minutes apart and locked away to prevent a future civil war. Voltaire, yes, that Voltaire, will later claim he knew people who guarded the man. He'll write that the prisoner wore an iron mask and that he played guitar beautifully. Which is a disturbing mental image, honestly. Others say he was an English spy, a disgraced bishop, an alchemist who learned the wrong truth. Some believe he had no name because he'd given it up, that he willingly became anonymous, either out of penance or to protect something larger than himself. The truth? No one knows, not now, not then, and that uncertainty makes him all the more powerful. You manage somehow to slip into the outer ring of the Bastille during a changing of the guard. You see the corridors, tight, damp, echoing with the clink of chains and the occasional muffled cough, and for a moment you think you hear music. Not a guitar exactly, but a soft humming. A tune you don't recognise. A passing guard flinches. "Don't linger," he growls. He doesn't like listeners. You're led past one particular cell, heavily reinforced, with a single high window no bigger than a bread loaf. The door is thick wood, riveted with iron. No one guards it directly, and that somehow feels worse, like the space itself is enough of a warning. You pause, trying to hear something, anything. There's silence. Then 3 knocks from the other side, measured calm. Your guide pushes you along quickly. Later you'll hear more rumours. That a guard once peeked under the mask during a late-night illness and was executed the next morning. That the man was seen writing once on the walls in blood. That a priest who spent an hour in the cell came out weeping and refused to speak for the rest of his life. Some accounts claim the prisoner was courteous, polite, quiet, always quiet. And that was what unnerved everyone the most. He never raged, never begged, never resisted, just waited. When he dies in 1703, he's buried under the name Marchioli, a placeholder, not his name, not anyone's name. The cell is cleaned out, his possessions destroyed, the mask vanishes, or is hidden, and that should have been the end. But it isn't, because stories like this don't die. They ferment. They turn into something more than historical oddities. They become folklore, mystery, warning, and then you find yourself years later walking past a crumbling abbey in southern France, and a monk stops you, asks if you've ever heard of a man who wore his silence like a crown. He says the masked prisoner didn't die, that what they buried was a decoy, a distraction. The real prisoner escaped, or was released, or disappeared in ways nobody can. Some say he still walks the earth centuries later, ageless, mute, watching, masked still, but now it's a different kind, a mask of anonymity, of hiding in plain sight. A man erased so thoroughly that he could be anyone, or no one. One fringe text, written in shaky Latin and stored in a crypt beneath a chapel in Avignon, claims the mask wasn't iron at all, but a relic, something ancient, something that suppressed identity, like a seal over the soul, that the man wasn't hiding from the world, he was being contained, that the mask kept something in. You try not to think about that version. Instead, you remember the cell, the 3 slow knocks, the humming that didn't come from anywhere exactly, and you wonder, what kind of secret requires silence this long? And what kind of man agrees to wear it? There's something not right about this forest. You feel it the moment you step off the path, just a half step really, to tie your boot or avoid a puddle, and the air changes, not in temperature, but in tone, like the light forgets how to behave, like the silence has teeth. Welcome to Kaliningrad, on the edge of the Curonian spit. It's technically modern-day Russia now, but what you're looking at has been here for centuries, long before borders and wars gave it a name. The locals just call it the Dancing Forest, a patch of pines unlike any you've seen before, and you've seen your share of forests. These trees don't grow straight, they twist, they curl, they loop in full circles like someone tied them in knots and forgot to untie them. Some spiral upward like wooden corkscrews, others bend so sharply at the base they almost grow back into the ground. It looks deliberate, like someone sculpted the entire forest with a giant's hand. But no one's ever taken credit. The older villagers won't go near it. They say it's cursed, that the land beneath the trees was once sacred to the Prussians, back when pagan gods still took offerings, and sometimes gave cryptic nightmares in return. Others whisper that something fell here centuries ago, something that didn't like gravity. You've been told this forest doesn't behave like others. Animals avoid it. Birds don't nest here. Sometimes the wind goes around it, and at certain times of day, dawn and dusk specifically, you can hear faint music. No melody, just tones. Low, high, low again. Like a child learning to whistle, or a string being plucked by invisible fingers. You stand among the trees staring at a trunk that loops in a perfect circle before shooting straight upward, and you try to make sense of it. It's not natural. Trees don't do this. Even wind-twisted trees or storm-bent ones don't form spirals like these. Some people say it was a freak genetic mutation. Others blame sand movement, shifting dunes forcing the trunks into strange shapes. But there's no evidence of that, really. Not in this density, not with this kind of repetition, because it's all of them. Every tree in the core of the forest bends, dances, or loops, as if they're reacting to something, dodging something. You step a little deeper in, and the air thickens. Not heavy, just present, like someone is watching. You try to convince yourself it's the density of the pines, that's all. the way the light filters through, but you can't shake the feeling that you've entered a place that doesn't want you here. Then you spot it. A tree that spirals in on itself twice. A full double loop, botanically impossible, and at the base of it, half buried in the soil, is something glinting. You brush the earth away and find a coin. No markings. Just smooth, silver-toned, cool despite the warm soil. It looks old. Older than the forest. You pocket it, because of course you do. Back at the edge of the forest, a local man watches you. He nods toward your hand, still brushing dirt off your fingers. "They don't like that," he says, voice flat. You ask who they are. He shrugs. "Whatever taught the trees to dance." That night, you sleep in a nearby lodge. Wooden walls, warm fire, safe, in theory. But your dreams are strange. You're walking through the forest again, only this time, the trees are moving, slowly swaying, not from wind, but with purpose. They make space for you, then close behind you, and there's a sound in the distance, a rhythm, like drumming, but wrong. You wake just before dawn, your legs are sore, your boots are muddy, but you didn't go anywhere, did you? The dancing forest has no official explanation. Scientists come, take measurements, scratch their heads, and go home with nothing but theories. Some say insects damaged the early trunks. Others suspect deliberate manipulation, young saplings bent by human hands for reasons no one can now remember. But none of that explains why it only happens here, why it persists, why the shapes aren't random, but often geometrically precise. Some trees form spirals with exact mathematical ratios, almost Fibonacci-like in nature. One researcher noted that if you map the tree curves on graph paper, they begin to resemble the patterns of ancient Slavic sigils. Coincidence, maybe. Maybe not. There are also the disappearances. Not many. Not enough to make headlines. But a hiker goes missing every few years. Sometimes they come back, sometimes they don't. And when they do, they always say the same thing. "I only turned around for a moment." You decide to return to the forest before leaving, just to look again. The trees are still there. Still bent, still quiet. But the light today is different. Colder. And when you walk among them, they don't seem to make space for you this time. One branch brushes your cheek. You flinch, laugh nervously. Then you reach the center again, the double spiral tree. You dig where you found the coin, but there's no hole, no disturbance, like the forest sealed it back up. On impulse, you toss the coin at the tree's base. It lands softly, bounces once, and the forest hums. You run. No footsteps chase you, no branches grab. But something follows, not close, not loud, just steady. When you break the tree line, the wind returns. The birds sing. A deer grazes nearby, completely undisturbed. The spell, if that's what it was, is broken. But in your bag, where the coin shouldn't be anymore, you hear it. A quiet clink. And that night, your boots are muddy again. You're on horseback now, the leather reins slick with your sweat. Hooves echoing against ancient stone as you gallop across the craggy landscape of Anatolia. The crusade has dragged on far too long. You've seen cities burn, temples desecrated, rivers choked with the dead. You've marched under both the burning sun and omens so thick in the sky they blocked out the stars. But this isn't war anymore. This is something else. You're chasing a rumour. A knight, one of your own, has been possessed. It started at the monastery of St. Simeon, where you and a few others took shelter after a skirmish with Saracen scouts. The air inside the monastery had felt wrong. The incense burned too sweet, and the monks watched you with the wide, unblinking eyes of people who've seen too much. Still, you were grateful for the shelter. That night, Sir Renaud, brave, pious, deeply uninteresting, wandered into the chapel alone. He came out changed. The next morning his voice was different, slower, sharper, his eyes darker. When he spoke, others stopped to listen without knowing why. He started speaking in Greek and Aramaic, languages he had no knowledge of, then Hebrew, then something no one recognized at all. The first sign was the animals. Horses refused to go near him. Dogs snarled. Even the monastery's cat disappeared. The second was the fire. A torch flared when he passed, the flame hissing sideways like it wanted to flee. You tried to forget the third sign. You saw it yourself, late one night when he removed his helmet. For a second, you saw something under the skin, moving, like fingers pressing from the inside of his face, then retreating. He smiled at you and said, "They're watching through me now." You didn't sleep after that. Now Sir Renaud is gone, vanished from camp 2 nights ago after killing the priest during midnight prayers. No sound, no warning, just a bloody altar, a shattered crucifix and a door left swinging in the wind. You and a few others set out after him, which brings you here, to the ruins of an old Zoroastrian temple, crumbling beneath a cliffside, half swallowed by vines and silence. This is where the trail ends. His horse was found tied outside, still breathing, but with eyes rolled back as if it had seen something it couldn't explain. You light a torch and step inside. Immediately the air goes wrong. It's not the temperature, it's the texture. Thick, wet, as if the very stones are exhaling. The walls are carved with symbols that don't belong to any religion you know. Circles, yes. Stars. But also spirals that tighten the longer you look at them. One has a centre that seems to move, even when you close your eyes. Then you hear it. Not footsteps, not breathing, scraping, metal on stone. You follow the sound to the temple's main chamber, and there he is, kneeling, facing a wall. Sir Renaud! He's taken off his armour. His skin is covered in black marks. Burns, maybe, or writing. He's whispering. You move closer and realise the language has no rhythm. It sounds like a river if rivers could speak. It makes your ears feel like they're about to bleed. You call his name, he stops, turns, and smiles. But it's not his smile. "Too late," he says. "They've nested." You raise your sword, but he doesn't flinch. Instead, he tilts his head and utters one final phrase in that impossible tongue, and collapses. Dead. Just like that. His eyes still open, his body twitching once, twice, then still. You burn the temple, every stone, every scrap, but something tells you it won't be enough. Because possession wasn't always about demons, not in the medieval mind. Sometimes it was spirits, curses, madness given shape. The church blamed the devil, sure, but older cultures had other names. Dybbuk, Jinn, Shedim. Even the Greeks wrote about spirits that walked beside people, whispering thoughts not their own. And sometimes the possessed didn't foam at the mouth or levitate. Sometimes they just changed. The scholar Michael Sellos wrote in the 11th century about a soldier who returned from the east with new powers, healing the sick, predicting storms, quoting scripture backward. He was honoured, then feared, then burned, and even as the flames reached his lungs, he smiled. Fringe historians have their own ideas. They talk about mind parasites, entities that latch onto the consciousness, steering behaviour, not always malicious, sometimes curious, sometimes exploratory. And in moments of trauma, war, grief, famine, those entities find open doors. You return to your camp in silence. No one asked what happened. They see it in your eyes, the way you look at shadows now, the way your torch flickers even when there's no wind. That night you dream of the temple, of the wall Renaud faced. But in the dream, it isn't stone, it's skin. You wake with a phrase in your mouth. Not a real one, not Latin, not anything, just sounds. But it feels like a name. And in the morning, one of your men asks if you're feeling all right. You smile and you lie. You've had fevers before, those long awful nights where your brain boils in your skull and reality unzips around the edges. But this is different. This is medieval medicine, and you're lying on a bed of straw that smells suspiciously like last year's goat, wrapped in a wool blanket that probably hasn't seen soap since the Crusades. Your lips are dry, your skin is ice, but someone insists you're too hot. They call the barber surgeon, which by the way is exactly what it sounds like. A man who cuts hair and limbs with equal enthusiasm and roughly the same level of training. He arrives grinning, carrying a rusty tray of tools that clink like cowbells and jangle with malice. You ask if he's a doctor. He shrugs and says, "Close enough," then cracks his knuckles over your face and announces that he's going to balance your humours. You wish he meant telling jokes. Instead, he means leeches. He pulls out a jar of the things, black, squirming, glistening like something between slugs and curses, and starts applying them to your neck, your arms, your legs. "They know where the bad blood is," he mutters. You close your eyes, trying not to scream as they latch on, and wonder how this became standard care. But here's the kicker. This is medicine. In medieval Europe, the idea of health is based on balancing 4 bodily fluids: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. Illness. That's just nature's way of telling you your juices are out of whack. So treatments range from bloodletting to vomiting to purging, basically emptying you out from all ends and hoping something positive happens in the chaos. You get better, or maybe you just stop complaining. Either way, you're walking again in a week, and then your friend comes down with the same symptoms. Only this time, the treatment's different. He's taken to the apothecary's house, a low stone building that smells like burnt cloves and despair. The apothecary is an old woman with soot-blackened fingers and a voice like a creaking door. She doesn't use leeches. She uses powdered mummy. Yes, mummy. She pulls a dusty jar from the shelf labelled Mumia Vera Egyptiaca, true Egyptian mummy. It's exactly what it sounds like. Ground up bits of embalmed corpses, imported from Cairo and sold as medicine. The logic. Ancient people must have known something we forgot. Plus they were preserved. So clearly ingesting them should help you live longer. Science. She mixes the powder into wine, stirs in a few sprigs of something that looks suspiciously like weeds pulled from between the cobblestones, and pours it down your friend's throat. He gags, weeps, but drinks it all. He recovers too. You both sit outside a few days later, half laughing, half horrified by what your bodies have just survived. And then the merchant walks by, selling powdered unicorn horn. You try not to react. Unicorn horn, also known as alicorn, was believed to neutralize poisons, cure epilepsy, purify water, and probably help with your taxes if you paid enough. Nobles paid fortunes for it. Of course, it wasn't actually unicorn horn. It was narwhal tusk sold by clever Scandinavian traders who knew exactly how much people would pay to believe in magic. But some were more creative. One particularly wealthy woman in Prague insisted on sleeping with a slice of narwhal tusk under her pillow to prevent nightmares. Another drank it in tea to cure melancholy. And if you couldn't afford the horn, no worries. There was always bezoar stone, calcium lumps from the stomachs of goats, believed to detoxify poisons and prevent death. Again, not joking. You once saw a man swallow one whole, then challenge a street magician to poison his wine. The magician refused. Smart man. And if none of that worked, you could always try trepanation. That's the one where they drill a hole in your skull to let the demons out. To be fair, sometimes it worked. Not the demon part, but the pressure relief. Head injuries, seizures, mental illness, all were candidates for a good old cranial ventilation. You'd be strapped down, offered a stiff drink if you were lucky, and then someone with the hands of a butcher and the patience of a sculptor would cut a circle of your skull clean off. You saw one once. The man survived. He said afterward the voices were gone, but he also forgot how to count. And yet, despite all this, you start to realize something strange. People did recover. Not always, not often, but sometimes. And in an age with no antibiotics, no germ theory, no clean water, it's a miracle anyone lived past 30. Maybe it was luck. Maybe it was herbs. Maybe it was faith. Or maybe, just maybe, it was a kind of wisdom we've lost in our rush to know everything. The use of plants like yarrow, willow bark, garlic. They had value. Some modern drugs trace back to those ingredients. And yes, the leeches made a comeback too. Turns out they're pretty good at restoring blood flow in reattachment surgeries. Go figure. You leave town with a pouch full of dried toad's breath, don't ask. A small jar of thick green salve that smells like sage and regret, and an uneasy respect for the people who stitched health from chaos. And that night, when your fever returns, you don't call for the barber. You reach for the salve, just in case. You're standing at the edge of a ballroom and it's the 18th century now, or at least that's what the wallpaper thinks. Velvet drapes, gilded mirrors, candles flickering in crystal chandeliers. Everyone here is far too rich, far too powdered, and far too obsessed with one man, the Comte de Saint-Germain. You've heard his name whispered in courts from Versailles to Vienna. You've seen his gloved hands leave a trail of fascination wherever they go. People speak of him with awe and confusion, like trying to describe a dream you half remember but can't forget. He's standing at the centre of it all now, tall, dark-haired, eyes far too sharp for someone allegedly over 100 years old. Not that he looks it. No, the Comte looks ageless. Not young exactly, not old either, just untouched, like time forgot to include him in its plans. He doesn't eat, doesn't drink, never removes his gloves, claims to be a musician, an alchemist, a painter, a philosopher, and somehow every conversation you overhear seems to confirm that he is all of those things. You hear him speak 10 languages flawlessly. You see him identify the precise origin of a diamond by scent alone. He tells a Prussian noblewoman a story about her grandmother's wedding, the colour of the ribbon she wore, the song that played when the cake was served, and gets every detail right. She faints. The gossip follows him like perfume. Some say he's the bastard son of a Transylvanian prince. Others say he's a magician who discovered the secret to immortality. One particularly drunk Austrian baron swears he once saw the Comte in the court of Charlemagne. When people laugh, he doesn't, and neither does Saint-Germain. Because here's the thing, no one can prove when he was born, or where. His documents are vague, if they exist at all. His name changes slightly in every country. He appears, dazzles, vanishes, reappears a decade later, looking exactly the same. Never aging, never retreating. Some try to explain it. Maybe he had a twin. Maybe he simply aged well, had access to rare herbs, avoided the sun, drank spring water infused with gold dust. You'd laugh too, if not for the paintings. In a dusty salon in Venice, you saw a portrait of the Comte dated 1710. He looks exactly like he does now. Same eyes, same slight smile, same gloved hand resting on a book you can't identify. Even weirder, the pigment used for the painting wasn't available until 1740. So who, or what, is he? Saint-Germain claimed to possess the elixir of life. He wrote letters about it in his odd rambling prose, full of alchemical riddles and half-translated Hebrew. Some say he studied under Hermes Trismegistus. Others say he was Hermes. There are records of him meeting the Rosicrucians, talking in code with Masonic leaders, vanishing into Egyptian temples only to re-emerge in Amsterdam like nothing happened. Voltaire, the famously sceptical French philosopher, once called him a man who knows everything and never dies. You can't tell if he meant it as sarcasm or prophecy. Back in the ballroom, you finally get close enough to speak to him. He turns to you as if he's been waiting. His voice is calm, measured, oddly soothing. He asks your name, and when you tell him, he nods slowly, too slowly, and says, "Yes, I remember." You've never met him before. He speaks of the stars like someone who's lived among them, tells you secrets you haven't told anyone, mentions a scar on your shoulder you've never shown. He smiles gently, as if to say, "I only tell what people already suspect." Then he disappears for 20 years. Again, there are stories that he never died. Some claim he faked his death in 1784 and fled to the east, where he studied secret traditions in Tibet, gathered wisdom from the ancient Mahatmas, and returned to Europe in a different face, with a different name. There's even a theory that he became the mysterious Count of Monte Cristo. Another says he was behind the sudden genius of Mozart. One writer swore the Comte advised Queen Elizabeth I, disguised as a court magician. Others say he's the wandering Jew, or Cain, or an angel who forgot which side he was on. And the wildest theory, he's still alive today, that he appears when the world reaches a turning point, that he walks among us slipping into society with a new name, a new suit, always gloved, always watching, that he never interferes, just guides, suggests, observes. You visit a library in Prague, and in the restricted section you find a letter signed only SG. It's dated 1623, but refers to events from 1939. The ink is still wet. Later, a manuscript surfaces in a monastery crypt. It's bound in strange leather, full of symbols that resemble both alchemy and circuitry. A page near the centre features a map of the human nervous system intertwined with an astrological chart. In the margins, a note reads, "Time is a hallway." You just need the right key. You don't know what to believe anymore. All you know is that somewhere at some level of the world's machinery, there is a man, or something that looks like one, walking through history without leaving footprints, and when you sleep you dream of him. He's never the same age, never the same voice, but the eyes? Always the same. It starts with a book. Not a grand one, not bound in human skin or etched in gold leaf, but an unassuming little volume you find tucked behind a loose brick in the wall of a Cistercian abbey. Dusty leather cover, no title, pages stiff with age. You flip through it expecting psalms or agricultural records, but what you find is art, or something pretending to be art. The pages are filled with drawings, plants mostly, except none of them exist. Roots that spiral upward, flowers blooming from stone, leaves shaped like hands. There are diagrams of naked women bathing in interconnected tubes, charts of stars with impossible alignments. Text fills the margins, tight, loopy, utterly unrecognisable, not Latin, not Greek, not anything you've seen. You've found the Voynich manuscript, or rather, an earlier mention of it, the one history doesn't remember. You take it to the monk in charge of the scriptorium. He pales, tells you to put it back where you found it. He won't touch it, won't explain, just says it's not meant to be read. So naturally you take it with you. Over the next few nights the drawings begin to follow you, not literally but in your mind. You see them when you close your eyes. Dream of the plants, moving slightly in an unseen wind. The stars rearrange themselves into patterns that echo the book's diagrams. The women in the tubes begin to hum. You don't know what they're singing, but it sounds like mathematics. You try to translate the text. At first, it looks like gibberish, loops and whirls and alien punctuation. But the structure is too precise, too consistent. You find repeating patterns, word-like units, echoes that mimic grammar. A language, yes, but not a human one. Later you'll hear rumours that this same script has been seen before, on stone walls in remote caves in Iceland, on shards of pottery unearthed in Anatolia. One obscure letter from a 13th century bishop describes a book written by angels who never spoke aloud. You visit a scholar in Bologna who's obsessed with cryptography. He stares at the pages for hours, then tells you this. The text appears to encode itself. The more you try to decode it, the more it reorders. Like it's aware of being read, he whispers, or resists comprehension. You leave his study and never see him again. Some believe the manuscript is a lost alchemical treatise, a record of knowledge too pure, too dangerous, or too alien to be trusted with ordinary minds. Others suggest it's a medieval hoax, someone's elaborate prank to confuse the ages. But no hoaxer has ever matched its linguistic depth. Its vocabulary size is consistent with natural languages. The illustrations suggest layers of meaning, not just chaos. One fringe theory says the Voynich manuscript wasn't written, it was dictated, by someone in a trance, by something from elsewhere, or elsewhen. Your dreams grow more vivid. You walk through greenhouses filled with breathing vines. You hear music that smells like cinnamon. You see yourself in a mirrored pool, but your eyes are shaped differently, wiser, or maybe emptier. You return to the abbey where you found the book. It's gone. The wall is sealed, the room is empty. The monk who warned you is dead, died in his sleep, mouth open in a silent scream, hands curled into claws. A note is found near his bed. 6 lines of symbols. Same script. Over the centuries, the Voynich manuscript will reappear at the court of Rudolph II, in the hands of Athanasius Kircher, in the library of Yale University. No one will decode it. AI will fail. Linguists will scratch their heads. Occultists will claim it holds the key to the hidden geometry of the soul. One man swears he read it, and afterward could no longer see faces without seeing their names burned into the air beside them. Another says the manuscript's true function is not to be read, but to read you. You try to forget it. You move on. But years later, while wandering through a monastery in Spain, you come across a carving on a pew. Familiar spirals, a star chart, a woman in a glass tube. You touch the carving. It hums. And that night, when you close your eyes, the plants are there again. Blooming, watching, waiting. The map isn't supposed to exist. It's a single sheet of parchment, brittle with age, ink faded like breath on glass. You find it in a merchant's chest in Constantinople, buried beneath bolts of silk and letters written in a dead dialect of Greek. It's unmarked, unsigned, and unloved, except for the tiny gold symbol inked in the corner, a star with 6 uneven points. You recognise that star. You saw it once before, carved into a doorframe deep in the catacombs beneath Rome. You spread the map out carefully. It's a coastline, sharp, jagged, snowbound. But the more you study it, the more it refuses to behave like ordinary geography. It curves where it shouldn't. Continents stretch in unfamiliar directions. The southern edge, labelled Terra Australis Incognita, a land no one's supposed to have mapped in this century, maybe not even the next. It's 1513. You're holding the Piri Reis map, and it shows Antarctica, without ice. You're not the only one shocked by this. Later, centuries from now, modern cartographers and historians will bicker endlessly over it. Because while Piri Reis, an Ottoman admiral and cartographer, does exist and does compile maps using older sources, the accuracy of this one is disturbing. The coastline of Antarctica, as it would appear without its ice sheet, wasn't officially surveyed until the 20th century using seismic data. Yet here it is, on aged skin, drawn in the 1500s, labelled in Ottoman Turkish, annotated with cryptic references to ancient seafarers. And worse, the annotations claim the source material came from much older maps. Maps from the time of Alexander, one note says. Another reference is a map that came down from before the flood. You stare at it too long, your eyes hurt. The southern lines seem to twitch at the edges, refusing to stay still. You blink, and the ink looks darker. That night you show it to a scholar, an Armenian cartographer with a fondness for Reiki and arguments. He studies it, scoffing at first, but by morning he's shaking. This coastline, it's too correct, he mutters. And here, look, see this latitude marking? It's based on a grid system we didn't even have until the 1700s. This wasn't just copied. This was preserved. From where? No one agrees. Some think the Piri Reis map is the remnant of a lost civilization. Atlantis, maybe, or something older, deeper, swallowed by sea and time. Others believe it's evidence of ancient astronauts, extraterrestrial visitors sharing global knowledge with early humanity. There's even a theory involving time travel, because of course there is. It's that kind of map. But you don't need sci-fi to be unnerved. You just need to realise that this parchment suggests a world that knew more, far earlier than it should have. Another theory gains traction, that there was once a seafaring civilization, long before ours, wiped out in a cataclysm, whose navigational records were preserved by secret orders, passed down in fragments, hidden in libraries now long lost. Echoes of this appear in strange places, like a 10th century Arabic map showing the Americas before Columbus, or a 14th century Chinese scroll describing islands of fire near what we now call New Zealand. In Prague, you meet a Templar-obsessed historian who believes the Piri Reis map was copied from a scroll stored beneath the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. He says it wasn't a map, but a warning, that the lines along the southern pole weren't coastlines. They were pressure points, faults, weaknesses. Look, he says, tapping a series of tiny triangles along the Antarctic edge. They match the quake lines. This isn't geography, it's a seal. He tells you to leave the map alone. You don't. Instead, you carry it with you into Alexandria, where a hidden archive in the catacombs beneath the library ruins promises older answers. You descend into the dark with a lantern, the smell of salt and dust wrapping around you like ancient linen. There's a door, locked. You have the symbol, the star with 6 uneven points. It opens. Inside is a room lined with metal scroll tubes, etched with letters that shimmer and vanish when you try to focus. You open one, then another. Charts, globes, maps not of the Earth as it is, but of the Earth as it was. Continents half-formed, oceans smaller, stars closer. You place the Piri Reis map beside one of these ancient charts. They match, even the flaws, especially the flaws. You sit down, and that's when you hear the voice. Not in your ear, not in the room, but in your head, somewhere between thought and silence. You are not the first. You turn. No one. But the room has changed. The scroll tubes seem newer, the air warmer. You smell smoke. Outside, through a crack in the stone, a red glow pulses. You leave the archive. The city above is gone, yet just sea, endless sea. You blink and you're back in Alexandria, map in hand. But it's changed. A new symbol has appeared. Faint, bottom corner, etched in gold. A compass rose, but the needle points south, to a place that shouldn't exist. You fold the map carefully as if it might crack open the sky, because maybe it already has. You've come to the end of the world, or at least that's what the locals call it. The land stretches no further. Beyond this last ridge of stone and frostbitten moss is nothing but sea, fog, and silence. You're standing on a jagged cliff in northern Scotland, late 11th century, staring at the North Sea as the wind howls like something exiled. You're here because of a single phrase whispered by a dying monk in a windswept abbey 2 weeks ago. Look for the green children. You didn't ask questions at the time. He died before you could. But you remembered it. And then, on your way north, you heard it again. From a woman in York, threading wool, who said it like a nursery rhyme. From a blind sailor in Edinburgh who laughed and said they came from beneath. And from a strange, pale-faced boy in the Orkneys Who pointed at the sky when you asked about the green children and simply said, "Not always up." Now you're in Woolpit, a sleepy village nestled in Suffolk that doesn't appear strange at first glance. It's quiet. Too quiet. You ask around, gently. Most people shrug, but one man, older, bent, with the look of someone who's buried more than he's forgotten, nods. He remembers. He was a boy when it happened. 2 children, a brother and sister, found in the 12th century standing near the edge of a deep pit, an old wolf trap the village had long stopped using. They were disoriented, frightened, wearing clothes no one recognised, and their skin, green, not olive, not sickly, green, like moss, like new leaves. They didn't speak the language, wouldn't eat bread or meat, only raw beans at first. And when they finally began to understand the villagers' tongue, they told a story no one could explain. They came from a land of perpetual twilight, no sun, no moon, just a soft glow, a world underground, or maybe under something. They were herding their father's cattle, they said, when they heard a sound, bells, and followed it through a tunnel of light. Then suddenly they were here, in this world. The boy died soon after. Some say from homesickness, others say from the food. But the girl lived, grew, married, lost the green tint over time, but she never changed her story, not once. You visit the site where the children were found. The pit is still there, overgrown, quiet, like it's holding its breath. The grass around it doesn't grow like the rest of the field. It's darker, wetter. You step closer. The wind cuts through your coat. The pit feels open, even though it's full of dirt. That night you stay in a small cottage near the edge of the village. You wake around midnight to a sound like distant music. Not a song, just tones, echoes. You walk outside and see a faint green glow in the distance. Faint, but real. Coming from the pit. You don't go closer. You want to, but you don't. In the morning it's gone. Modern scholars have tried to explain the story. Some say the children were Flemish refugees, survivors of war speaking a garbled dialect, that their green colour came from malnutrition, chlorosis, a type of anemia, that their story was metaphor, or misremembered, or exaggerated through centuries of telling. But none of that accounts for the specifics: the unnatural diet, the resistance to sunlight, the lack of shadows, the deep, uncanny certainty in the surviving girl's voice, and the pit. There are older stories too, about strange tunnels beneath the hills of Britain, hollow earth myths, the Celtic belief in the Sidi, fairy folk who dwell in mounds and barrows, appearing in times of disruption or transition. They're not tiny winged sprites, not the Disney kind. They're ancient, strange, dangerous, not quite gods, not quite mortals. Some versions say the green children weren't lost. They were sent. To test something, to learn, or to seed. A fringe theory connects them to the Bell Beaker culture, a Bronze Age group known for their burial practices and peculiar astronomical alignments. Some researchers believe the Beaker graves align with underground passageways, and that the green children were descendants, or creations, of a surviving offshoot that stayed below when the rest of the world moved on. Others take it even further, that the green children were not from under the earth, but from a parallel version of Earth, one slightly offset, a mirror world, a place where sunlight never breaks through, and evolution took a slightly different path, that they found a crossing point, a weakness in the boundary, and slipped through. One map from the 14th century, locked in a private collection in Avignon, marks Woolpit with a symbol no one else uses, a spiral overlaid with a dot. It's the same symbol used on the Piri Reis map down in Antarctica. You begin to wonder how many of these strange tales are connected. The green children, the Voynich manuscript, the dancing forest, the man in the iron mask, all pieces of something larger. A thread pulling through the medieval world, not in a straight line, but in loops, spirals, intersections. Something is breaking through. Something that's been trying to speak for centuries in fragments and half-truths. You leave Woolpit quietly, but not before walking to the pit one last time. There's a sound, just barely, like breathing, or waiting. So here you are, 30 chapters later, still lying there in the soft glow of your screen or earbuds, maybe wrapped in blankets or cocooned under a ceiling fan humming away like a sleepy time machine. You've wandered through worm-infested manuscripts, cursed forests, forgotten maps, unsolved trials, twitchy stars and green-tinged children who may or may not have crawled out of the earth, or through it, and you made it, barely. Because let's be real, between the mystery meat cures and rogue alchemists, dancing plague outbreaks, and monks chasing celestial jellyfish through stained glass telescopes, medieval history isn't just weird, it's comically unhinged. But also, weirdly familiar. Like there's a part of you that recognises it. That secret whisper in the back of your mind going, oh yeah, I've dreamt this before. Because the people back then, they weren't that different from you. They stared into the dark and tried to explain what stared back. They misunderstood comets and blamed demons for soup that went bad. They invented logic, then set it on fire. They tried to trap evil in bottles and buried maps just in case someone clever, or unlucky, found them again. And beneath it all they kept seeing something else. Something on the edge of the woods. Something under the stairs. Something that didn't fit into the clean boxes of faith, or science, or politics. And they didn't look away. They wrote it down. And somehow, through plagues and purges, libraries and lootings, those scraps survived. Now they're yours. So tonight, as you drift off, remember this. The past is full of secrets. The world was strange, is strange, will always be strange. And if you ever find yourself digging in the garden and hear a whisper, or stumble across a spiral carved into stone, maybe just listen. And maybe don't open the bottle. Sweet dreams.